Hello and welcome to Six Part 2. I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku with Spider-Man Quirk couldn't save All Might? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Katsuki Bakugo and the Baku Squad, also known as Eijiro Kirishima and Denki Kaminari, surrounded Izuku Midoriya. Evidently, Bakugo's nickname, Kachan, was upset about something. What was it? These days, Izuku largely ignored Kachan's words, which were typically insults. Bakugo shouted, "You do not talk to her. How many times I gotta tell you that? Do you listen when I talk? Hey, I asked you a question. Do you listen when I'm talking to you?" Izuku shrugged and said, "Huh, sorry, I wasn't listening. Kia is my girl, you don't talk to her." Bakugo reiterated. Izuku joked, "I think that's up to her, don't you?" Bakugo became enraged by this and punched Izuku in the ribs. Izuku let out a painful groan. "Leave her alone, stupid Izuku, or next time you're gonna pay," Bakugo screamed. Izuku spat blood out. "Will a credit card be okay?" The other two chuckled because they thought Izuku was funny. Bakugo was even more enraged by this. He grabbed a trash can and was going to drop it on Izuku's head when he heard someone speak up behind him. "What kind of man?" They pivoted. Kurisuta Hikawa, a 17-year-old Japanese-American girl with caramel skin, bright blue eyes, and long ebony hair, was standing in the alleyway's entrance. Kuri gave Izuku a wink and said, "Picks on a helpless little dweeb." They had been best friends since Bakugo dumped Izuku during his rookie season. Izuku complied. "Look, I know you mean that in a good way." Bakugo lifted the garbage can once more. Kuri yelled, "Leave him alone, Bakugo, or I'll tell my sister." Bakugo's girlfriend, Kiana, was Kuri's sister. Her sister Kiana, who had long blonde hair tied back with a red bow and pale skin, didn't resemble her at all. She also detested fighting, particularly when Bakugo was harassing Midoriya. Bakugo threw the trash can aside after upsetting it and spilling its contents on Izuku's head. He and the others leave Izuku, strewn with trash and humiliated, and make their way to the alley's mouth. Kuri lingered. For a brief moment, the alley was empty except for them. With a smile, Izuku said, "Thanks, Kuri." Kuri took care of Bakugo and said, "No problem, Zu. It's a shame really. You two used to be so close, what happened?" Izuku picked up the trash and stretched, saying, "Simple. Kachan grew into his body, and he said, pointing to his squat, ungainly figure. Didn't." Kuri gave a small laugh. "Don't sweat it, I like the way you look. Muscleheads like Cat have already peaked at this age." Izuku made fun of Bakugo, her childhood nickname. They emerged from the alley, turned a corner, and found themselves in front of an impressive old building on the Columbia campus in Manhattan. Their classmates from Class 1A were hanging out near the bus that was taking them on a field trip to Totocorp. Bakugo and the Baku Squad were playing chicken and challenging one another to run out in traffic. Kuri knew that the only reason they hadn't yet been struck by a car was because Reiko was standing at the edge of the road. It went by so quickly. Kuri took a sharp breath and knew Bakugo was out of there. Before her muscles gave out, all she could do was push Izuku in the direction of the street. Kachan. Izuku yanked Bakugo out of the car's path. Kuri shut her eyes. She was aware that her best friend was going to pass away. However, then, the triumphant cry of All Might's hero, "I am here." He saluted the others while carefully holding Izuku in his arms. The veteran hero waved off the throng of Class 1A. "If you will all excuse me, I am going to give this child a talk about traffic safety." All Might and Izuku then took off into the sky, and not even Mr. Aizawa, their teacher, could find anything wrong with it. But Kuri did. She felt a sense of dread. Incredulous, Izuku Midoriya was placed on the roof by his hero. All Might said, "What's your name, kid?" Izuku stammered, "Izuku, sir." "Izuku Midoriya, I'm a big fan. Would you sign my—" All Might coughed, "No time for that. I've got something to show you." A little smoke billowed up, and All Might now looked shattered and shabby. Izuku's eyes welled up with tears as he gasped. Izuku whispered, "This is because of that horrible villain, isn't it? No one knows his name but—" All Might groaned and said, "It's all for one. And yes, this is his doing. For now he is imprisoned in Gotham, but I have seen his strings at work here in New York. I have been thinking to myself that the time has come, young Midoriya." F for what? Izuku was the one with the dread this time. All Might coughed and said, "First of all, I must tell you my name, young Midoriya. My name is Toshinori Yagi." All right," said Izuku. "I'll call you Mr. Yagi then, if you want." All Might gave a nod. "I saw what you did out there. That boy had been beating you senseless moments before and you still saved his life. You have the makings of a true hero." Izuku gave a firm shake of his head. "I can't be a hero. I don't have any special powers or anything, and I'm not Str. Batman doesn't. Iron Man doesn't. It isn't superpowers that make the hero, young Midoriya." Izuku declared, "I want to be a scientist, Mr. Yagi. I want to support my mother and change the world with my discoveries." All Might let out a sigh. He took the notebook and signed it, saying, "You don't have to decide now, young Midoriya. I have a feeling the answer will present itself when the time is right." He was shocked to see a variety of notes about heroes. Izuku had only been repeating the lies he told himself, he realized, but all he ever wanted was to be a hero. That sealed the deal. "Will you shake my hand, young Midoriya?" Izuku's eyes glowed. "Yes, of course, Mr. Yagi." Everything changed when the hero shook hands with his young protege. One student had not yet joined them, so a town car was waiting for the bus outside the Todocorp building. Shoto Todoroki was this pupil. He was seated beside his father, Enji Todoroki, in the rear seat. Shoto had already inherited many traits from his father, including fiery ambition, golden eyes, red hair, and a severe face. Since Enji's ambition had virtually destroyed their family, there was no love lost between the two. Due to the successful human trials conducted on Todoroki family members, Todocorp has advanced in performance-enhancing pharmaceuticals. Shoto's hair was half white and his right eye was gray because of the side effects which had been removed from the medication in post that had given the siblings and their father strange abilities. His mother had the strongest power and all white hair, while his older siblings who underwent more testing had increasingly white hair. In the meantime, the father tested his family to remove any contaminants and kept the post-drug for himself. Even though it killed his oldest son and left his wife in the hospital, he was able to obtain all the power he desired without any of the suffering. Enji kept his family far away from him, acting as though they were infectious, even though he was unaware of the fire and ice that afflicted them. He intended to finally take the drug himself and accompany his son in his pursuit of power now that his favorite and least damaged son was old enough. Even though Shoto detested his father, he secretly hoped for his approval in some way, and he was eager to see him suffer from the drug he had developed with his family's help. Enji shook his head and gazed out the window. "Anything wrong, Dad?" Shoto asked calmly. "You hardly said a word all the way from the house." "You'll have to get dinner yourself tonight, I need to work." Enji replied. This was not novel. They say if you talk about something that worries you, you take away its power. Shoto responded. Additionally, his father would soon be taken out on his family for whatever was bothering him. "I was under the impression you asked me to give you a lift, not deliver a speech on the way." Shoto sighed and said, "Sorry. That's a waste." Enji glanced at him, clearly thinking of something. He looked up and saw the driver's eyes dart away from him in the rearview mirror. "John, would you mind?" John, the driver, replied, "Not at all, sir." As the driver exited the town car, shut the door, and stood next to it with his hands clasped in front of him, a few students caught sight of him. Enji looked over at his son. "I don't appreciate the amateur psychoanalysis. Maybe you are becoming like your mother." Enji replied. He had sent Rei to the mental hospital years prior for an incident, the burning of Shoto's face, that he was responsible for, so it was a serious threat, primarily to keep her quiet. Shoto abruptly shifted the topic. "Is it the company? If there's a problem, you could tell me about it. Is there?" Considering Todocorp's market capitalization just exceeded the gross national product of Spain, the answer to your question is no, there's nothing wrong at the company. Enji exploded. Shoto questioned, "Then what?" Enji accusedly asked, "How many private academies have you been kicked out of?" Shoto averted his gaze. "Has it sunk in for you that you're now attending a public school? Are you aware of the ramifications of that?" Shoto whispered, "I like it better. One day you will inherit Todocorp." Shoto exclaimed, "But what about Natsuo? Fuyumi?" Enji went on as if he hadn't said anything. "One day you will run my company. My grandfather's company. Since you asked, Shoto, that's what worries me. In fact, it terrifies me." Shoto muttered something unintelligible, embarrassed. "You may have been given the name Todoroki, but you haven't earned it. Enji replied with firmness. Shoto was left on the curb as the town car swiftly withdrew from the street after the rear door slammed. Izuku Midoriya was the first person he saw. He had just returned from his strange conversation with All Might and was admiring the town car. Wow, a chauffeured ride. Shoto snapped, "What are you looking at?" He turned and stalked up the building's stairs. Izuku let out a sigh. A difficult morning. Izuku. Hey Izuku. Kuri sprinted over to join her friend. You excited for the field trip? Reiko's been talking about it for days. Reiko, her sister, had bright green eyes, curly red hair in a ponytail, and pale skin with freckles. She was also a pacifist, just like Kia. Kuri was the family's savage member. Okay, Mana and Kuri. Grams as well. Reiko always gets excited about science stuff. She's always been the brains of the family. Izuku laughed. Kuri yelled, "What does that make me?" Izuku smiled and swung at him, saying, "You my friend, are the looks." Izuku was holding his camera around his neck as they stood outside the science museum. Hey guys, did you hear? I got the job at Totocorp. Reiko declared. To which Izuku replied, "No way really. You're going to work for Shoto's dad's company." Reiko remarked, "Well, it's all thanks to Shoto." Shoto, coming closer, red in the face. Not really. You wowed my dad with all your corporate knowledge. I think he wants me to marry you. Reiko's blush came next. Please, I'm much too young for all that. The four of them went into the museum when the teacher called. Spiders are the first exhibit. Izuku grabbed Kuri's arm, but she didn't notice because she was listening to the presenter's every word. He needed to give her a pinch. Kuri exclaimed, "Ow, come on now, they're so cool." She gestured to a picture on the screen and said, "If I were a spider, I'd be that one." Wait, where is the little guy? I wanted to say hi. The presenter raised her gaze from her iPad. That one must be in for examination today. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, miss. Izuku pinched Kuri once more despite her somewhat dejected expression. Izuku, shouted Kuri, "Ow, hey, you know I need good pictures for the paper. And those guys keep messing me up. Think you can help me out?" Izuku replied. "Sure," Kuri said with a smile as he approached the bullies. They all had blank looks without saying anything, as if they were deeply contemplating a mathematical problem. Izuku was unaware of Kuri's technique, but she was able to control anyone's emotions. When he questioned her about it, she explained that it was a priestess thing. Kuri and her sisters served as priests at the Hikawa Shrine in Chinatown. With a sigh, Izuku snapped his photos before grabbing Kuri. "Come on, I'm getting you too." "No frickin' way, Izuku. You know I'm camera shy," Kuri replied. Shoto said, "Then you two together. Me and Kia will take the picture." "Yeah," exclaimed Kia. Reluctantly, Izuku gave up his camera, and the two of them were photographed together. Izuku grinned in the photo. Kuri asked worriedly, "Everything all right, Izuku?" "Yes," Izuku uttered uncertainly. Izuku created the image himself later that evening and saved a copy. It was their first photo together in a very long time. He went to his window after hanging it on his mirror so he could see it every day. Kuri's window had a binary flashing light. Goodnightzuku. Izuku's light flashed back in binary. Goodnightkuri. Izuku gasped after he sighed and glanced at his hand where All Might had shook it, and passed out. After school, Izuku stumbled into his home. Professional wrestlers were fighting on television. Izuku's mother, Inku Midoriya, observed from a rocker in the living room in a modest two-story house. An announcer on TV was very excited. The announcer, Present Mike, exclaimed, $3,000, 1,000 per minute in the ring, payable only if you survive the full 180 seconds. Inku raised his head. Hey, Izuku, take a look at this guy. Calls himself muscular. Izuku stumbled, don't feel well, out loud. What? Inku hurriedly got up and approached him. Dear, how was the field trip? I saved a nice plate for you in the oven, we had pot roast with. Izuku passed her on his way to the upper floor. Not hungry. With concern, Inku called, where are you going? Izuku assured them, gotta sleep, everything's fine, before slamming the door to his bedroom. Oh dear, mumbled Inku. I hope he doesn't have the flu. She nearly made her way to the stairs but changed her mind. Oh, he's just being a teenager. In his bedroom, Izuku fell to his knees and gripped his stomach in agony. He gave a gasp. Help! He collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. He examined the hand. All Might trembled, now swollen and utterly red. He reached for his wrist and pulled his fingers away. They were extremely perceptive. He was now drenched in perspiration and shivering violently. He succeeded in dragging the sheets and blanket down over him after pawing one hand up to the bed and ripping them off. He huddled beneath them, his face pale, his eyes sunken and black, his teeth chattering, his body trembling violently. His eyes suddenly roll up into the back of his head, and he faints. His eyes flicker quickly beneath the lids. Izuku heard people whispering about him while he slept. He started having dreams. Much too young. What was Toshinori thinking? It's this kid that will be inheriting our powers along with One for All. Izuku's eyes cleared and he reached out. He couldn't see much because they were smoke and mirrors, but he could see All Might. The fanboy would recognize him anywhere, even though he was made of smoke. Izuku attempted to yell, "Ah, my was goin' ONH." However, it appeared as though he was absent. Maybe him being young is a good thing. He has time to do what we could not. A child cannot do what must be done. Izuku was growing irritated. He discovered his voice. I can be a hero. All Might told me. As the other heroes evaluated him, the smoke started to clear. And then his eyes opened suddenly. With morning light pouring in through his window, Izuku awoke. Startled by his dream, he blinked several times. He was still in the same spot on the ground where he had fallen. However, he appeared to feel better as he reoriented himself. He took a few deep breaths and carefully extended his legs. Without a doubt, he felt better. He tossed the sheets and blanket aside in relief. And gave a gasp. He and the sheets were encircled by a black cord. It vanished after another blink. However, what was it? He thought he heard some laughter, but was it his imagination? Abruptly, he became aware that he was floating. He fell hard to the ground, startled. Oh no! A knock on the door was heard. Izuku was startled, and all of a sudden, purple smoke filled the room. He hurriedly opened the windows. With concern, Inku said, "Izuku, are you all right?" Feeling guilty about the previous night, Izuku replied softly, "I'm okay, Mom. I'm fine. Just had a bad dream. You must be starving. You ran right past your dinner last night, so I made an enormous breakfast. How's your flu? Any better this morning?" He stumbled to his feet, attempting to confront Black Whip. "Izuku, any change?" Izuku grinned and said, "Change? Yes, big change. Hold off until everyone has a ton of him." Izuku entered the bathroom and switched on the shower. He took off his t-shirt and looked in the mirror twice. His once underdeveloped chest had grown into the size of a Greek god. It's a flawless chest, not overdone like a bodybuilder's. He examined his thighs, calves, and arms. Amazing. No longer a loser. In the mirror, he examined himself. Observed something else. Distinct. Izuku grabbed his glasses from the countertop and put them on, saying, "Hey." He narrowed his eyes. Everything was now hazy. When he removed them, it was 2020. He tried again. On, off. He could see. Izuku dropped his glasses into the garbage can. The refrigerator's front door was forcefully opened, and Izuku began rummaging through its contents while muttering to himself. Mysterious power. Must be some kind of strength quirk like Superman, no alien descent. Inku gazed at him. Everything okay? Gnawing on a piece of meat loaf, Izuku turned. Something you want to tell me? Izuku thought to himself as he paused his chewing for a moment. How should I phrase this precisely? Answer. No, I don't. Nope. Izuku ate a chunk of leftover steak while walking to his bus stop. He caught a glimpse of Curry crossing the street. Smiling, Izuku said, "Talk to her, talk to her, talk to her." He lifted a hand and waved, feeling more confident today. Hello. Inquisitive, Izuku stepped off the curb and into the path of a speeding delivery truck, causing the horn to wail. She stopped and said something, but a car passing between them made it impossible for him to hear her. He cupped his hand to his ear, saying he couldn't hear her. Izuku looked up as Curry screamed. The truck's grill was directly on top of him and bearing down quickly. Unless he jumped, there was no way he could avoid being struck. He instinctively bent his legs 3 times before leaping 20 feet straight into the air. A building was approaching quickly, and Black Whip leapt out and grabbed it, launching him onto the roof. Izuku realized he was floating once more as he looked down at the ground. Whoa! Izuku had disappeared, and Curry gaped in terror as the truck moved out of her field of vision. As the truck slowed and rounded a corner, she peered down the street. It was strange that there was no thud or body stuck to the grill. She was startled out of her reverie by another horn, and it was Bakugo and his team, who had come to drive Kiana to school in a very fancy car. Curry got back on her Vespa, still perplexed, and watched as her younger sister climbed in the back and the car pulled away. Izuku stood on the roof and looked down. He wasn't sure if he could float all the way down, and he couldn't really control Black Whip, but since there were no stairs and he would be late, he stepped off the roof and fell directly to the ground, where he landed with feline grace after floating down slowly. "Gosh," Izuku remarked. He glanced around, saw that no one was looking, and tried it again, bending his knees 10 times this time. He leapt, soared, straight up into the air, and landed on the roof of the 3-story building. The metal crushed beneath his grasp as he reached out for a drainpipe, laughing giddy and ecstatic. He then grabbed another pipe, this time made of galvanized steel, and squeezed it with the other hand, but the same thing happened. Izuku, completely terrified, went to the building's edge and peered down, then across the alley at the even taller structure. After some fighting, he finally began to get it across, but his aim was terrible. He focused and moved his hands around until he was able to bring Black Whip out, but it wasn't very obedient yet. It eventually flew across the alley and adhered to the other building's side. It was fairly tough, so Izuku pulled harder, but he was unable to break it. He wrapped both hands around it and yanked as hard as he could, pulling himself off the building's roof without breaking the webbing. Izuku screamed as he flew through the air, but he managed to hold on to Black Whip, which caused him to swing across the alley and land on the building's opposite wall, floating just a little while he did so. Almost instinctively, he turned, floated down the building's side, and landed upright in the alley. He looked around and saw no one, laughed, and stopped. Terrified, he had to locate All Might. Oh boy. Izuku reached his locker at school and began dialing a combination when his brow furrowed and he placed a hand on his forehead. Strange intuition. Danger, Izuku whispered. He instinctively turned into a defensive stance just in time to see a fist aimed directly at him. With lightning speed, he leapt to the side just in time to avoid Katsuki Bakugo's punch, which collided with Izuku's locker. You couldn't avoid her, could you? Bakugo snarled. In order to conceal the teacher's view, Kirishima and Kaminari quickly shut the doors to the classrooms on either side of the hallway. Izuku truly meant it when he said, "I don't want to fight you, Kachan." He had no idea how his newfound abilities would affect his childhood friend. Bakugo growled, "I wouldn't want to fight me either." They were soon surrounded by a crowd. Bakugo took 2 more swings, but Izuku quickly ducked them again, leaving Bakugo perplexed. He was smart enough to know that something was different, but what? Izuku abruptly ducked, sensing an attack from behind, leaving Kirishima, who was approaching him stealthily, gasping for air. Izuku got up and threw the man off his back. Shoto Todoroki was one of the many people gathered to observe. Bakugo roared in anger and lunged at Izuku, who dodged 1, 2, 3, and 4 punches without even moving his feet. Instead, he darted his torso around so quickly that he created a motion blur. Impressed, Shoto shook his head and glanced at Reiko, who was standing next to him. She looked back at him, and Shoto glanced back at the fight before giving Reiko a second look. Whoa, she's really attractive. Izuku returned to the battle, balled his fists, and launched himself into the fray, winding up. One of the classroom doors opened off to the side. Just as Aizawa emerged from the open door, Izuku withdrew to deliver a blow. What on earth is happening out here? The voice prompted Bakugo to turn, but Izuku was too late. The punch landed hard on Bakugo's jaw, snapped it, and sent him crashing back against the lockers, hard, before he slumped to the ground, unconscious. Startled by his own power, Izuku gasped. He wasn't even looking. You shit. Kaminari yelled. Midoriya gave Bako a sucker punch while he was simply standing there. Kirishima stood up. Skeptical, Aizawa said, Midoriya. Yes, he did. Izuku smiled, pleased with himself. I succeeded, honestly. When Kirishima lunged at Izuku, more teachers arrived to stop them, and chaos ensued. I swear, I did. Query them. In fact, I did. Izuku was too arrogant to acknowledge that he was in grave danger. I'm starting to like the little spaz, Shoto said, turning to smile at Reiko. Shoto was aware of her smile. Friendly, shy, modest, and leadership, a combination that has been shown to be successful. He smiled, proud of his name. By the way, my name's Todoroki. Reiko chuckled. Incidentally, I am aware. To the boisterous farewells of Shoto Todoroki and his companions, an expensive car with loud music playing was pulled over. Shoto Todoroki was driving, and Reiko Hikawa was laughing when he got out. A shouted curse alerted her to her home, a lower middle-class residence similar to Izuku's, and she noticed that there was always a party somewhere for the Hikawas. Grams and her older sister Kuri were arguing outside through the living room windows, and she could clearly see that their voices were too loud. Reiko hurried up the stairs and entered the house, adding to the shouts. She pulled the blinds, but the silhouettes were still there, and a child started crying, which only seemed to aggravate the elderly woman more. Grams' speech was slurred, she was unsteady on her feet, and she was way too loud. Kuri came out on the porch after hammering through the screen door. Looking to the side, to the house next door, she saw Izuku Midoriya, too, out on his porch with a man she didn't recognize, his father, perhaps. He was a huge fan. Izuku's house is right next to hers, maybe 8 feet away, across a narrow driveway. Kuri was jealous of Izuku and the man, who appeared to be having a quiet, contemplative conversation in contrast to her own circumstances. To have someone who was older, wiser, and genuinely concerned. No listening in. Quietly, she made her way back inside to the safety of her room. Izuku was listening to All Might at the time, and he was horrified to learn that the hero had learned about the fight. All Might sounded disappointed, but he said, I won't ask what the fight was about, that's your business. You're changing, and that's normal. However, using this power for one's own benefit is not intended. Its purpose is to safeguard the defenseless. I'm just saying be cautious about the person you transform into. Okay, Midoriya, young one. I feel all this power, but I don't know what it means, how to control it, even, or what I'm supposed to do with it. Izuku couldn't resist using his hero name, and All Might didn't correct him. I'm trying, All Might, I am. You'll discover the solution. You saved your enemy, All Might reassured him. You were the one I chose. You have a hero's instinct. And now one's power. However, great power also entails great responsibility. Keep that in mind. Much more than fistfights in the hallway, of those to whom much is given, much is required. All Might, I think you're about the best mentor a guy could ever have. I wish there was some way I could help you the way you helped me, Izuku said, nodding in awe of his hero's wisdom. Young Midoriya, All Might said, placing a hand on his shoulder, just be the greatest hero you can be for me. The new peace symbol. Then All Might vanished, and Izuku sat there thinking about what he had said for a while before entering. Izuku covered his mother with a blanket and went to switch off the television while she slept in the rocker. Looking at the screen, Izuku said, Hey, guess what's on? Wrestling. Izuku grinned as an idea began to take shape. For the time being, this was what he could do. He could practice his abilities in a secure environment and assist his mother in paying the bills. He leapt to his feet, ran upstairs, and, with an exuberant hoot, leapt into the air, flipped, and landed on the bed while grinning wildly. A woman stood in the center of a bank that had collapsed. She had a star on her forehead, caramel skin, dark, fathomless eyes, and long, dark hair that reached her feet. She was dressed in a long, star-studded black dress. She spun around as the police showed up, and the dress changed to a one-piece suit. The officers gasped on the ground as the woman crushed their necks with her outstretched hand. The woman sighed and said, She won't let me kill you. My name is Sadako. If you remember anything while you choke on your lungs, remember that. Kuri's hands were clenched at her sides when she woke up. What a horrible nightmare. Izuku crawled up the side of his house, over the top of his window, just outside her window, then reached over, turned the window upside down, pulled it open, and crawled down through it, across his room's ceiling. He fell to the ground and drew the shade. Sensing something, Kuri spun around and peered out the window, gone. If only she had been searching. A newspaper in Izuku's room crinkled open to reveal a sizable advertisement in the sports section. It said, Amateur wrestlers, take note. $1,000. In the ring for only 3 minutes. Characters with color are essential. The advertisement was torn from the paper by Izuku's hand. Izuku was quickly sketching the outline of a human figure and different costume options on the sketch pad he was holding in front of him. He sketched the figure with 2 wings. Izuku whispered, a hero with wings. But I float just fine on my own. He jotted them down. He crumpled up the page and started over after trying antennae, which he also detested. On top of the mask, he draws some stuck-up pieces, such as All Might. It looked cool, and he liked that. He touched a strewn about drawing. He was dressed in a green and black costume, and he was a hero. However, he did not sketch this. The caption said, "You were capable of being a hero. Love, Mom." Izuku softened, holding the drawing to his chest, then taking the mask and holding it up for comparison. Perfect. He knew his mother only meant that he was her hero, and she had no way of knowing the truth. Izuku was reading Principles of Sewing in the school library and making a lot of notes. Izuku slammed the book shut as Kiana passed by, on his finger. 2 danskins, one dark green and one black, spilled out of a plastic bag later on his bed. Colors blended well together. The black, green, and nearly opaque white mesh he was using for the eyes were all cut by a razor knife. The metal component he was using for the face chin guard was added. Izuku experimented with Black Whip while standing in a deserted junkyard. About 50 feet away, he arranged a row of targets of various sizes. He attempted to strike an antique TV. Widely missed. Tried. Something bigger. A Plymouth Duster from 1968. Not even near. Izuku felt irritated. Izuku leapt back and looked around the entire junkyard. Black Whip was all over the place. He would need to solve this. Fortunately, All Might had informed him of every quirk, so all he had to do was use their power. He worked on the others after removing Black Whip. It was fairly simple to float. All you had to do was go up and down and forward with Black Whip. He was able to move fairly well despite his poor aim. He then spent some time practicing with Smokescreen before switching to Fa Jin. After bending his knees multiple times, he leapt. How high he could get still astounded him. Let's start punching. That was quite simple. Like Danger Sense, this was a natural part of One for All. To avoid killing anyone, he simply needed to learn how to control it. Izuku rehearsed Black Whip, which is a direct hit on a Coke can 50 feet away. Izuku smiled. He gave it another go, precisely hitting a milk container 100 feet away. Giddy, he whirled around like a gunslinger, shooting Black Whip everywhere. A car that had been crushed and piled on top of 10 other cars was struck by one. Ignoring his strength, Izuku pulled, causing the entire tower of wrecked cars to topple over in his direction. Instinctively, he sprang forward and pushed the stack back up. He shouted in triumph, raising both arms in amazement and delight at himself. On a Saturday afternoon, 1,000 wrestling fans flocked to a smallish arena in Midtown Manhattan. A vintage Chevy Caprice stopped at the curb. Izuku was at the wheel with All Might in skeleton mode. Izuku said, "You didn't have to drive me, All Might," with regret. The train stops right across from the library. All Might said in a conversational tone, "I thought this'd give us a chance to talk, young Midoriya." Izuku said, "We hardly said a word." All Might tried to joke, "Who needs words?" Izuku shook his head and laughed. All Might took a brown paper bag from the back seat and began to give it to Izuku, but he quickly withdrew it. With trepidation, Izuku said, "Thanks. I got it." All Might grinned and said, "Pick you up on this corner at 6 o'clock. As his mentor pulled back into traffic, Izuku waved and continued down the street, walking against the wave of wrestling fans. Izuku waited until the Chevy had left before turning around and joining the throng heading into the arena. At that moment, there was a loud roar and an amateur wrestler in costume crashed into the wall of a cage match ring in the middle of a tiny, hot, dusty arena. As the wrestler moaned in pain, a referee intervened to halt the fight. Muscular, standing over the shattered body of his fallen opponent, was 6 feet 9 inches tall and 300 pounds of pure muscle. He roared at the spectators. It was a nasty place. Paramedics rushed in to assist the defenseless amateur after a guard hurried to a gate in the cage's wall and unlocked it. 17 seconds. 17 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. Is there no one who can last 3 minutes in the cage with Muscular? Asked Present Mike as he moved forward and grabbed a hanging microphone. Once more, Muscular roared through a mouthful of jagged teeth. There may even be a few English words in there. Present Mike went on as the paramedics removed the amateur wrestler from the ring on a stretcher. Will the next victim please enter the ring at this time? If he can withstand just 3 minutes in the cage with Muscular, the sum of $3,000 will be paid to. He pivoted and pointed to the ringside. The spotlight came on. Wearing his homemade costume, Izuku climbed to the top of the stairs and into the spotlight after two guards opened the cage doors wide. It had a nice appearance. Present Mike leaned over, looked him over, and covered the microphone. Dekiru, what does that mean, man? It implies that I always try my hardest. Izuku exclaimed with pride. I believe we are capable of more. Present Mike leaned into the microphone and said, Deku will receive $3,000. Izuku moaned. Could the guards please lock the doors to the cage? Slam, slam. Deku was startled when two enormous barred doors clanged shut directly behind him. The keys were ceremoniously turned in the locks with a click. A bell rang. Muscular roared as usual, and the fight started. Deku swallowed, hovering at the ring's edge. This man was scary. Muscular let out another, louder roar, anticipating a lunge from Deku, who shuddered in the corner, realizing that he was unprepared. Muscular roared, glad to comply, and threw himself across the ring with 300 pounds of brute force as the crowd let out a wild cheer and demanded that Deku be destroyed right away. At the last second, Deku bowed his legs 3 times and leapt straight up into the air, his wide white eyes popping even wider and wider. Muscular went under him, bounced off the ropes, and Deku landed neatly on his shoulders. He smiled, his confidence growing quickly. What is that, spandex? It's not a bad costume. I used lycra for mine and it itches like crazy, Deku said in a conversational tone. He shot Black Whip straight above him, to the bars at the top of the cage, 20 feet up, and Black Whip stayed there, leaving Muscular alone when he fell to the canvas. Muscular tried to backfall, to crush Deku beneath him, but the hero was too fast for that. He blinked, exhausted by the wind, and saw Deku floating directly above him, miming and looking at his watch. A minute already, gee. Could you please give me a magazine? Deku smiled. Deku flipped over, climbed up Black Whip until he was 20 feet above it all, and yelled down as Muscular screamed in rage and leapt to his feet. Hi, Muscles, is that considered remaining in the ring? Get down here, Muscular shouted. All right, Deku grinned. The crowd erupted, flashbulbs popped, Deku raised his arms in triumph, and he let go of Black Whip, dropping 20 feet straight down and landing directly on top of Muscular, who fell to the canvas beneath him, pinned. Ah, behind his mask, Deku grinned, showbiz. The promoter placed $100 in Deku's palm while he was in the administrative offices upstairs at the arena. Izuku was still wearing the costume. The promoter yelled, now get out of here. $100. 3,000, the advertisement said. Deku objected. The promoter growled, check it again, freak. It said 3 grand for 3 minutes. He was pinned in 2 by you. I'll give you 100 for that, wise ass. You're fortunate to receive it. My best fighter looked like a girl because of you. A squirrely-looking man with platinum blonde hair crept into the office behind them. You don't understand, it's not for me, it's for my mom, she needs this medicine, see, and, Deku tried to say. A mother who is ill. Are you real? I missed the part where this is my problem, the promoter said with a mocking laugh. Deku stared at him for a long time, his hands clenched into fists as he wanted to bust him in the nose. He shuddered and could have put him through the wall if he so desired, but he turned and walked away instead. Clutching the dreadful $100 bill and muttering to himself, Deku walked down the hallway until he was almost at the elevator when he heard someone shout behind him. Hey, how in the world do you? The promoter's shadow was flung violently to the floor, the door slammed open, breaking the glass, and the squirrel-looking man, a thief, ran out with a canvas bag in his hand as he turned to see silhouettes moving violently in the frosted glass window in the door to the administrative offices. Aid, officers, that guy stole the gate, and he's got my money. The promoter cried. The thief fled down the corridor toward the elevator as a police officer came up from one end of the hallway, calling ahead to Deku as the elevator dinged and its doors began to open. Hi, you, put an end to that man. Glancing up, Deku saw the thief sprinting directly at him, the cop pursuing him, and the elevator opening behind him. He pondered, debated, and retreated as the thief dashed past him and into the elevator. Thanks, freak. When the cop arrived, he slammed his fist on the elevator doors and said, what the hell's wrong with you? All you needed to do was knock him down. With a big red welt on his cheek, the promoter hurried up from the office and said, you could have taken that guy apart. He's going to steal my money now. Returning his line, Deku grinned and said, I missed the part where that's my problem. He turned and headed down the hallway. As night fell, Izuku emerged from the arena wearing street clothes once more. He didn't notice the flashing lights and small group of people gathered on the far corner. Instead, he began searching for All Might's car. Izuku looked to the left and right, but he wasn't there yet. He was standing on the corner where All Might had promised to pick him up. Izuku disregarded the siren-wailing police car that raced past him and made its way to the far corner. He looked up the block and checked his watch, but there was still no All Might. Izuku turned as an ambulance screamed past him on its way to the far corner, and paramedics leapt out as it pulled up. He wandered across the street with a mild interest now, his brow furrowed as two and two came together in his mind in a negative way, and he walked faster. It couldn't be. Walking faster and faster, he elbowed his way through the back of the growing crowd, then the middle. As a desperate conviction grew in his mind, he thrashed, breaking through the front of the crowd and looking down at the ground, where a young woman named Miko was working while hunched over a body. While on her first police job, Kuri had a vision of a man being shot in front of the wrestling dome, and she knew who it was, All Might, Izuku's mentor. Kuri let out a sigh and understood that she couldn't reveal her true power to Izuku or anyone else, so she had persuaded the police to let her wear an odd outfit, which included a white kimono dress top, a Mardi Gras mask, and a gold pentacle necklace. Her greatest secret, her wings, floofed and flapped behind her. She knelt before the body of All Might. From ashes to ashes, spirit to spirit, I let you go to the afterlife. In Japanese, Miko said, Blessed be. His soul departed from his body and flew up and away without anyone else seeing. Miko stopped. Izuku was standing in front of her, his face displaying rage. What have you done to him? He insisted. A carjacking occurred. I was performing last rites when he was shot, Miko said. He turned when he heard the police discussing the location of the carjacker, and there was a struggle on his face, followed by a realization. Miko sighed. She had never been one to meddle with fate, but she could not allow Izuku to begin this journey toward heroism with a murderous act of retaliation. Lifting her wings, she trailed him into the darkness. A man tore off his clothes violently, casting an exaggerated shadow on the brick wall of an alley. The shadow quickly grew larger as the man began to run, and then it leapt high into the air, landing directly in front of the building. Izuku may have been in the Deku suit when he climbed into the ring, but now he was Deku. The amazing Deku started to float straight up the side of the building, rising higher and higher until he burst out over the edge of the roof. As he looked out over the horizon from the roof, he noticed a group of police lights at the Hudson River's edge to the west. Almost without thinking, he raised his right arm and let go of Blackwhip. Holding it aloft with Blackwhip's tensile strength alone, Deku put his hands around it and leapt, swinging out over the city before falling in a beautiful, terrifying arc. As the ground rushed up toward him, Deku's left hand rose. The hero abandoned the first strand and shifted his weight to the second as Blackwhip shot out into the night, pulling himself back up in a beautiful arc that rose toward a glass front building directly in front. Impossibly quickly, the glass front building raced up, but rather than smashing through it, he stopped and floated. Deku turned to search for another tall building, and when he saw one, he threw out Blackwhip with his gloved wrist, leapt from the structure, and swung off into space once more. That's what being Deku is like. A young boy, clutching his mother's hand, had witnessed the entire event and dropped his ice cream cone, causing it to splatter on the sidewalk at his feet. An abandoned factory at the Hudson River was encircled by a ring of police cars. All Might's Chevy was smashed into a dumpster in front, with the driver's door hanging open. Radios screamed, and police gathered around the barricades, discussing how to enter and who needed to do it. Unseen, a shimmering dark figure swung through the night, directly in front of them and behind them. Deku landed silently and floated on the side of the factory, his movements perfect, elegant, and economical now, as if he had become his best self in the last 5 minutes. He slithered through a blown-out window close to the roof line, floating sideways but quickly. Deku drifted across the factory roof. He looked down at the deserted factory floor. The carjacker was huddled over in the far corner, a shadowy figure attempting to conceal himself amid the corroded machinery. Quickly and silently, Deku approached until he was directly above the carjacker, staring down at him. Red police lights reflected off him, bouncing around the empty factory as they strobed through the dirty, leaded windows, revealing only his outline. The carjacker cowered, muttering to himself, obsessively checking his weapon to make sure it's loaded. He was terrified, but it was impossible to make out a word he was saying. Deku floated slowly down behind him, landing softly on his feet and looming behind the carjacker. Sensing something, the carjacker spun around and fired a shot at Deku. Deku used Fa Jin to leap up, and the carjacker, who Deku could only see as a red silhouette, began firing at him, one shot after another, as Deku leapt from wall to floor, barely escaping the bullets. The cops heard the gunfire in the street, pressed forward, saw people moving inside the factory, and saw rifles steady and weapons drawn. Deku performed a particularly impressive leap in the factory, landing on top of the carjacker's arm and kicking the gun free. As Deku held the man up and curled a fist, the gun skittered across the cement floor. "This is for the man you murdered. Dakota is amazing." Deku leapt into the window frame, grabbed the carjacker, and pulled him to his feet after he punched him in the jaw, knocking him off his feet and sending him flying into one of the unbroken windows, which shattered. The cops heard glass breaking in the street. Out the window. The factory was the focus of their spotlights. In the manufacturing facility. "Avoid hurting me. Give me a chance, man, give me a chance," the carjacker begged. "Did you let him try? The man you killed," Deku exclaimed. "Did you? Get back to me." Outside spotlights swung around to frame the two fighters in the window one by one, and then the carjacker's face appeared, brightly lit, with a police helicopter hovering overhead and the prop wash blowing the carjacker's hair in all directions. His hair was platinum blonde. God help him. Deku's eyes widened in terror as he realized that the carjacker was the thief who had taken the money from the arena, the one Deku had moved aside for. "No, not you, please. Yes, yes him." Deku shuddered in horror at the horrifying realization. The man who killed his mentor was the one he was unable to stop. Images quickly returned to him. The officer shouting at him. "Get that guy to stop." As the doors to his escape closed, the thief stood in the elevator, glaring at him malevolently. The body of All Might, lying in the road. Outside the factory, the cops gazed in awe at the odd couple, framed by the bright lights that now shone into the factory's broken-out second-story windows. "What on earth is that? Open the fire." When the cops saw the figures in the window, they opened up. The thief screamed as bullets flew everywhere, more glass shattered in the window, wood splintered, and Deku screamed back in pain and rage, "Throw the thief off the building." Miko appeared in the warehouse's shadows after flying in. In an instant, she was on him. "Catch him. Be the hero you promised to be with all of your might." Deku growled at her, fired Black Whip, apprehended the thief, and placed him down in front of the police before turning on her. "Who are you? How did you find out about me? What are you after?" Deku insisted. With a smile, Miko said, "You know who I am." "What?" Deku was perplexed. "My name is Miko." Miko fluttered her wings. Deku tried to catch her with Black Whip, but he only managed to catch air. Deku was startled to see Curry, dressed simply, conversing with an officer as he peered down at the police observing him from below. She then turned and looked directly into his eyes. What had she seen, and why was she crying? There isn't time for that. As Deku leapt up onto the factory wall and floated all the way up the roof, 6 stories above them, the police let loose a barrage of gunfire. She appeared to mutter something as Curry watched, and the cop next to her let out a cry. "Don't shoot, please. Are you blind to the fact that he is on our side?" However, the gunfire persisted, marking only the beginning of Deku's lengthy and misinterpreted career. However, for some reason, the bullets never seemed to reach him, and Deku managed to meet Curry's eyes in the darkness, and he received a curious look in return. No time for that, though. After reaching the roof, Deku fell to his knees in the helicopter's roaring wind, his arms flung up in agony as he looked out at the harsh city skyline. No, he let out a scream, but the buzzing of the helicopters drowned it out. He saw another image, a massive representation of All Might's face that billowed out of the black-bottomed clouds above him. "Always remember, young Midoriya." Deku's voice echoed over the thunderous roar of the impending summer storm as lightning flashed in the sky, defining All Might's face, transforming it into a skeleton's head for a moment before erasing it entirely. With great power, Deku started to yell, "God forbid, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Great responsibility. Gunfire resounded in the distance, like the drab cannon booms of a distant funeral, and lightning flashed. What a horrible nightmare, Curry thought as she awoke with her hands clenched at her sides. Curry gathered her belongings and made her way to the door, realizing that she was running late for the bus. Today was graduation. She smiled at Izuku beside her, but he appeared distracted. "Come on, This is meant to be the greatest day of our lives. Why are you taking this so seriously? Curry inquired. On her first day at Oscorp, Reiko, who was already wearing her gown with Shoto, remarked, "No kidding, he's been grumpy all morning. After I graduate, Mr. Todoroki is taking me there." Shoto laughed and remarked, "Yeah, Dad sure does love you." "Yes," Curry remarked, "it's also my first day at the new job." "Curry, do you have a new job?" Izuku inquired. "Oh yeah, I'm like a police psychic." Curry chuckled. "I prefer consultant, but that's what they're calling it. They want me on full-time since I've already assisted with a few murder and missing person cases, as long as it doesn't interfere with my ability to write." "What is a career in writing?" Reiko chuckled. "Come on, you already know. I want to write novels." However, Curry mentioned, "I saw an advertisement in the paper, they're looking for an advice columnist. That could be fun." "Hey, that's exactly what you're looking for. No one knows emotions as well as you do," Izuku exclaimed. Curry replied, "Ah, thanks. I think I'll do it." You don't mean that, Katsuki," Reiko said, staring at Bakugo with a dejected expression. "Don't push me away. Listen, you're better off without me, okay?" Bakugo screamed while clenching his fists. Katsuki, please, you have to trust me." Bakugo's hand burst into flames. Before anyone could see anything, Reiko caught herself in the act of blinding them with light, creating the illusion that the sun was striking the mirrored cars. Bakugo gazed at her as though he had never seen her before. "Well, we have something to talk about," she spoke in a sheepish tone. Confused, Bakugo forced a smile and said, "Sure." After graduating together, the four of them went to the olive pit for dinner. Bakugo and Reiko went home, and each time she attempted to hold his hand, he pulled away. She was shocked when they walked into his house, which appeared to be in good condition on the outside but was in ruins inside, with everything scorched and burned. "Bakugo, what's?" She had seized him too quickly. Boom. Bakugo jumped back to avoid being struck by the explosion. "Don't do that, you can't surprise me at all, damn it. So your hands explode, huh?" Reiko approached cautiously. "Yeah, have you thought about chatting with other metahumans? I mean, there are people like you," Reiko inquired. "One is Spider-Man. Many people are able to assist you." Bakugo grunted. "Heroes. They use their powers to save lives. How on earth is this destructive force capable of doing anything but murder?" Reiko embraced him, saying, "You do realize that super strength can kill. However, most heroes have it. It's all about controlling your strength and accuracy." With a sigh, Bakugo said, "That's from martial arts. Black belt in Taekwondo." Reiko grinned. With a smile, he said, "Okay senpai, how do I learn control?" "You need to learn more about your power," she said with a smile. "Practice. You're a decent person, Bakugo, and you can use it for good. You are not evil in any way. Go all in, though, if you're going to be good." "What in the world does that mean?" Bakugo inquired. "It means, make amends with Deku. He is the type of man you are in need of at this moment," Reiko said. "He is a man who can assist. You'll be too afraid of killing me to have a full-on attack on me. To put it briefly, you require a sparring partner. You're nuts. I wouldn't put Deku through that because I don't even like him. I believe we've moved past that. I can't help you as much as you need. I take it you don't want to harm anyone. I take it you want to be a hero. Act morally." Bakugo moaned. Knowing she was correct, he had been considering it a lot since gaining this power, and Deku, Izuku, had served as a moral compass during their friendship. He had only gotten worse after dropping Izuku, until he began to feel like a villain. If Reiko hadn't found him, he would have, he shuddered. "Don't think about that." Bakugo then got up, put on some gloves, and went to the Midoriya residence. The events that took place there were solemn, quiet, and private. Reiko only knew that Bakugo had entered the house in a state of confusion, brokenness, and darkness, and that he had emerged smiling as if a heavy burden had been lifted. However, it was only a single step in the long process of becoming a hero. "I need a good shot of that vigilante, please," said Jameson. "I know someone who can do it," Curry remarked. "I don't want to hear from you, you're just a ghost writer for our advice column." Jameson replied. "The Ask Annie column was dead before she started, and now she gets 1,000,000 letters a week," Robbie said, adding, "You should listen to her, sir. People take her advice to heart. She also works for the NYPD, so she is likely aware of Deku's hangout spots. Curry laughed and said, hangs out. So, who can get me a photo, girl? Said Jameson. Tomorrow, I'll bring him. Give him a job, Curry remarked. Izuku, you really need a job. Pulling him in, Curry said. Are you certain that this is a suitable location? Izuku remarked. Curry responded, yeah, I do a lot of ghost writing here. Izuku said worriedly, I didn't know you had a second job. Yeah, Grams wants to be a police officer. Mr. Jameson, this is what I want, Curry uttered. Your photographer is this one. He is able to take pictures of Deku. What? Izuku remarked. You had better give him $500 apiece. Or we both go for walks. Curry insisted. You can't give up, Curry. You're my best writer, kid. Damn it, you have a freelance job, Jameson admitted. Curry smiled. Rescue. Curry was on her way home from work at the NYPD when she was encircled by a group of men who yanked at her skirt, pulled her shirt, tore it, and pinned her to the wall, pressing his filthy lips against hers as he was dragged away against the wall. Spider-Man pulled them all, yanked them into a bundle, and then beat them up. We don't strike women, Deku remarked. With a roar of rage, the thugs charged at him from across the street. Deku stated, we hit the men who hit women. They stood up and fled when he threw them all against the walls after dropping into the center. Deku stood with his chest heaving as the thugs dispersed. He searched for Curry, but she was nowhere to be found. Why hadn't she waited to see him become a hero? He was devastated. With a pout on her face, Miko glinted into view and said, ah, you didn't leave any for me. Angry, Deku told her, I'm not in the mood for you right now. Are you attempting to win over your girl? Miko said, her eyes glimmering silver, a clear indication that she had been spying on him with her abilities. What made her go? Did I frighten her? Deku was angry. Nah, Miko shrugged. Most likely, she was just ashamed that she needed to be saved. These days, women want to be tough. She wants to be tough. Deku remarked doubtfully. This, Curry, girl is not to be taken lightly. You talk endlessly about her. Curry needs to be a formidable opponent if the legendary Deku is in love with her. Mark my words, Miko said with a smile before disappearing once more, as usual. Curry gave Izuku a box containing his belongings. You'll degrade living with Bakugo. You really think I can do this, moving out? Izuku responded. Curry gave him a cheek kiss and said, I've known you for years, Izuku. You're awesome. Izuku went downstairs after blushing. Inko asked, are you sure about this, Izuku? College, a job, your own place. You're not Superman, you know. Curry and Izuku shared a laugh. A police officer was severely striking a teenager with his nightstick. His companion smoked a cigarette while observing. Flying out, Black Whip snatched the nightstick and wrenched it from his grasp. The officer spun around. Behind him, Deku floated at the side of a building. Stop it, I'm a cop, exclaimed the officer. Black Whip struck his lips. In the world of good cop, bad cop, you are definitely a bad cop. Deku replied. Deku turned and floated up the building as the cop fumbled for his gun. Deku was already floating off into the darkness when the cop fired 2 shots that chinked off the brick where he was. The teenager stood up and began running during the distraction. Miko had caught him. Miko leaned in and caressed the teen's cheek, saying, now dear. Let's see to those injuries. Her sacred energy healed his bumps and bruises while a spiraling glow of silver light enveloped him. The Daily Bugle featured the headline, Deku and Miko help Crook escape, alongside an image of the irate police officer on the front page. Jonah Jameson noticed Robbie glaring at him as he lowered the paper. Robbie said, you know that isn't true. Jameson remarked, that's why we put quotes around it. Other employees scowled at him. They also didn't like it. Jameson exclaimed, get me a picture if you all love him so much. Izuku was assisted by Curry in moving into his apartment. Curry noticed Bakugo and Reiko making eye contact as they were tidying up his room, and she grinned. Curry said, look there. To Izuku. Izuku remarked, you think they're. Curry laughed and said, sure enough. Izuku laughed as he glanced at her. Curry placed a camera on the table and experimented with it. There we go. Now it'll be perfect for your new job. As Izuku put it, thanks to you. Curry stuck her tongue out and said, don't mention it. Black Whip held the camera in place while shooting into the corner of a building cornice from a rooftop. Reaching into the frame, A beige glove chose a shutter setting. A camera's eye view of the rooftop, looking slightly down over the city, can be seen through the viewfinder. In the frame's corner, the word, automatic, flashed in red. Abruptly, Miko appeared in front of the camera, dangling dramatically from a web strand, and Deku swung into frame. The shutter pressed. Shimmering away, Miko said scornfully, "You owe me one." An action shot of Deku and Miko was the end result. A hand passed it, then another, and still another, all excellent shots, flying, floating, and blackwhip. Jonah Jameson tried to conceal his excitement as he looked up. On the other side of his desk stood Izuku. Curry smiled at Izuku and said, "Good shots, right?" Izuku smiled and said, "They sure are." Jameson asked, "Where'd you get these?" "If I tell you that, you'll send your own photographer next time." "This is my job," Izuku replied. "No jobs. Freelance, perky, best thing in the world for a man your age, don't get tied down." "I'll give you $100 for the lot," Jameson replied. Turning, he walked out of his office. Izuku trailed behind. Curry insisted, 1,000 or we walk." Izuku gave her a grateful glance. "Damn it, Curry. Fine, fine, you win." Hoffman, exclaimed Jameson. Hoffman looked up from his cubicle, looking exhausted. "Cut a check to Izuku Midoriko for $1,000, less taxes," said Jameson. Izuku looked over at Hoffman. "It's Midoriya, I do. Social Security, and voluntary contribution to that charity my wife likes," said Jameson. "Sir, if you could just put me on the payroll. See, I really need the insurance I'd get with a full-time job. My mom has this condition." Izuku responded. "Insurance? What are you, a photographer or a claims adjuster? What happened to hard drinking and Australian bush hats and lying to foreign women? Stick around, kid, I'll make a journalist out of you." "Hell, Hoffman, remind me to send him some Christmas meat, now get me more pictures." Jameson responded. Over the headline, Deku and Miko, Hero or Menace. The Daily Bugle featured one of Izuku's dramatic shots of Deku and Miko. Exclusive images. In the Diamond District, 3 police cars squealed to a halt outside a jewelry store after screeching around a corner. The store's front window was smashed, an alarm bell rang, and 3 robbers were trapped above the doorway, writhing in Blackwhip's grip. Curry and the first policeman jumped out and stood below, looking up in wonder. The window fixed itself as they arrived, and the cash swung back into the registers from the robbers' pockets. The picture appeared next to the headline, "WHO runs this town." In the Daily Bugle, police unable to stop Deku and Miko. Robbie gave Jonah a look. "How come you hate him so much?" "Because he's a vigilante. Thinks he's above the law. What if he turns against us someday? It's just a matter of time." "Look at him. Look at those eyes," said Jameson. They gazed up at a grainy blow-up of Deku and Miko's faces, with her Mardi Gras mask mocking them and his evil masked eyes staring directly at them. "Is there a man alive who could give those lunatics a fight?" replied Jameson. Town car. While the town car crawled through congested midtown traffic, Enji Todoroki sat in the back and read the Wall Street Journal. It's a fantastic day outside, with rain beating down on the tinted windows. He turned and stared icily at the person seated next to Enji. It was Reiko, his new assistant, wearing black slick pants and a purple cheongsam top. Reiko was tapping her knee anxiously with her fingers. Enji's mouth tightened. He looked at Reiko while folding his paper. Enji asked, "Are you going to disappoint me?" Reiko spun around and ventured to look up at her boss. She opened her mouth to respond, but changed her mind. Enji quickly bounded out of the car as both rear doors flew open and were deftly pulled open by suit-clad security guards. Shoto trailed behind, fearing what lay ahead. In the center of Manhattan, a chilly black monolithic skyscraper towered over them. OSCORP, the building's resident, was announced in tall, fiery red letters atop the structure. Reiko and Enji walked from the car parked at the curb to the front of the building far down the street. As soon as they arrived, a sea of umbrellas carried by minions rushed out to greet them. As they made their way to the building, Enji turned on the sidewalk and barked at Reiko over his shoulder. Enji said, "Walk beside me, not behind." Reiko quickened her steps to join her boss. They arrived at one of the 2 glass elevators that cling to the building's side. 2 additional security personnel stood watch over the twin elevators, sunglasses in the rain and wires in their ears. As Reiko and Enji got closer, one set of doors whooshed open, and they entered. The doors of the elevator closed. Reiko looked at her supervisor. Reiko said, "Please don't make me do this." Enji said, "You wanted to learn. You'll learn." According to Reiko, "I'm begging you." Enji impatiently pushed one of the two silver buttons on the panel beside the door after reaching past him. Enji replied, "Don't. I just ate." A motor inside the elevator began to hum, and the elevator moved on the sidewalk. However, the elevator zipped downward, into and through the sidewalk, rather than upward. As they went down into the building's interior, the glass allowed Enji and Reiko's faces to be seen. As the elevator descended far below the streets of Manhattan, large horizontal stripes of red and white whipped past. "I abhor weakness. I don't permit it in myself. I won't tolerate it in you. Running a company is a lot more than handing out paychecks." Enji replied. The elevator abruptly stopped, and a lab's doors suddenly flew open. Lab. There was a huge laboratory underground. Test tubes, beakers, stacks of microcircuits, partially assembled gadgets, scribbled formulas, schematics, and warning signs were arranged in rows. It was humbling to see how much thought goes on here. Enji was observed by a lab employee. With urgency, he turned and ran across the floor in the opposite direction. A single row of switches ran down the middle of the center tube, which was some sort of propulsion system, and he passed what appeared to be an aerodynamically refined boogie board, with upturned fins on each side and footholds carved into the top of each wing. A technician wore a lightweight, extremely tight-fitting helmet while the device hovered over a bench, shielding his eyes with large yellowish-green plastic bulges that gave the device an evil appearance. Head of an insect. The device reacted to the technician's head movements, pointing up when he raised his head, banking to the side when he turned his head, etc. The lab worker crossed the lab. A man in a long white lab coat was working in front of a large glassed-in room on an elevated platform that he approached. His arms were plugged into some sort of apparatus, carefully manipulating a labyrinth of interlocking chemical tubes and micronic circuitry contained within an isolation tank with glass walls. The tubes must be behind glass because strange gases leaked from them. The lab worker rushed to stand next to him and whispered something in his ear. Reiko said, "Human performance enhancers." The two men appeared taken aback. Reiko stated, "I've been working on the project with him." Enji asked, "How's it going?" "Nearly there. We tried vapor inhalation with rodent subjects. They showed an 800% increase in strength. Intellectual capacity increased beyond measurable limits of testing, and maze solving ability became nearly instantaneous." Reiko concluded. Enji said, "Excellent. Side effects." Reiko gave a shrug. "Violent tendencies, central nervous system dysfunction, and dominance. Death, insanity, decompensation, and obsession. So they become stronger and smarter. But it kills them. Not exactly marketable yet." "The other projects?" Enji replied. "All good. Individual airborne transports are all tested. They look fine. Hallucination orbs are good to go. Manufacture can start in a month. We can deliver to the government by the end of the year." "You're going to make another fortune, Enji." Reiko replied. Enji remarked, "That's what I'd hoped to hear." Reiko remarked, "If that's all." Numerous switches and levers were knocked out of alignment when Osborne violently crashed into a control panel against the distant wall. The lab was filled with a low hum. Formulas and data were bakugoed on the monitors of a nearby bank of computers. A gravy-brown liquid started to warm as heat whirled around the edges of a blue coil on a workbench. Liquids and vapors crept through a nest of tubes, awakening all around the lab. Enji got up with difficulty. In the meantime, the gases and liquids began to flow more quickly around him, to bubble. To his strange gases swirl in tubes. The system was groaning, smoke and vapor were seeping out of the connections, and something was seriously wrong. A high-pitched alarm went off. Desperate to get out of there, everyone left in the lab, including the security guards, turned and ran for the doors. Glass tubes broke like springtime ice all over the laboratory. Tubes, gases, liquids, and vapors all collapsed inward on one another as the entire structure imploded with a huge, weird sucking sound. A terrible silence fell for a moment. Boom. Everything flew everywhere as it exploded now. After being flung against the wall, Enji collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Reiko vanished beneath the glass wall that was blown 10 feet across the room from where she was standing. A thick, fat green cloud rolls out of what was the isolation tank and seeps toward the floor. As the vapor passed a row of storage cabinets, it revealed an odd characteristic. "What's inside them?" like an X-ray would, and the doors were once more opaque when it passed outside the cabinets. N.G. Osborne lay on the ground, unconscious, and the vapor seeped over his body. Bit by bit, it engulfed him, revealing his skeletal structure, the very bones beneath his skin. His mouth and teeth, the top of his skull, his eye sockets, and the skin turning temporarily transparent. Little currents of the amazing green gas were being rhythmically drawn up into his nose while he continued to breathe. The gas sucked down through his windpipe, briefly billowed in his lungs, and then gushed out through the cilia as it was distributed into his bloodstream, entering his now visible system. The substance swirls up inside his brain in eager, oxygen-fed tendrils. Chemically enhanced rats writhed in the thick gas, screaming and screeching in their cages inside the destroyed isolation room. The green gas that had been hovering over N.G. Osborne's still body across the lab eventually vanished, leaving Osborne on the floor with his body no longer transparent. His eyes suddenly opened to the public. His once icy blue eyes had turned a sickly, fluorescent, demonic, green. Somehow unharmed, Reiko lay beneath some debris in the center of the lab. She got up with difficulty and went first to see how her boss was doing. Grabbing her by the throat, N.G. raised her above his head. Back to formula. He threw her dead into the debris across the room after breaking her neck. He was unaware that the deceased Reiko was an illusion that flickered and then vanished. It would be difficult to kill Kitsune. Shoto asked, "You awake?" Was Reiko's reply. "I found you in that shambles of a lab. I'm so sorry. If I hadn't gotten you that job," said Shoto. Reiko sat up and said, It's not your fault. See, I'm not even hurt. I've been thinking. I really thought you were dead when I heard about the accident." Shoto replied, "And I can't really imagine a world without you. So Reiko, will you please go out with me, be my girl?" Reiko chuckled. It took you long enough to ask Shoto. Of course. Even though Reiko was happy that her longtime crush had finally noticed her, she was still thinking about what had happened the night before. At least Enji witnessed her demise. He would undoubtedly try to complete the task if he saw her again. Reiko wasn't a superhero. In fact, she was horrified at the thought of wearing a suit and using her abilities to perform heroic deeds. She was a kitsune, a creature that liked to trick people and hoard shiny objects. As Shoto assisted her in gathering her belongings, she glanced at him. But was she prepared to turn into kitsune in order to defend the man she loved? Izuku saw Kuri as he was making his way to his apartment down the street. "Hey Kuri," Izuku waved. "Oh hey Izuku," exclaimed Kuri. "So how's work been? I know you've been ghost writing and working for the police." Izuku responded. "Yes, it's hard to balance two jobs, but what are you gonna do? I gotta pay the bill, ya know." Kuri smiled. "I'm just glad you got your own place. How's it been?" "Excellent. I'm in college now. You didn't want to go." Izuku responded. Kuri acknowledged. "Izuku, I never enjoyed school." Izuku understood why. Kuri, like the rest of them, had never found school easy. However, he cherished learning and couldn't imagine his life without it. "Don't worry about me, I'm doing what I always wanted, and keeping Grams happy too." Kuri replied. "It's the dream, right?" Izuku responded. "Yeah, the dream." He forgot to add that without her, his dreams wouldn't be complete. Izuku sat on his bed after completing his unpacking. "Shoto, you've gotta let me pay some of the rent." "No can do. Dad bought this whole apartment for me, so what's the point?" Shoto replied. Izuku sighed and said, "Right. Your dad." Shoto asked, "Is this really all your stuff?" "Not much." Izuku remarked, "Don't need much." The doorbell rang. "Who might that be?" Shoto exclaimed, "Oh, here she is." With a sudden brightness in his voice. Reiko entered and grabbed Kuri by the sleeve. "I made her come too. Three's a crowd and all that." Reiko rushed over to give Shoto a kiss. "It's good to see you, honey." Izuku processed, blinking. Shoto and Reiko. What finally made him realize how much she had loved him? Perhaps if there was hope for them. He gave Kuri a look. She turned around. Kuri handed him a very nice camera and said, "Brought you something." Far superior to one he could afford. Izuku couldn't say anything. The best he could hope for was beauty. However, although Izuku's hands were literally sticking to the camera, he said, "I can't accept this." He was reluctant to let go. Kuri said, "You already have. Go catch that story, Izuku." Just off Park Avenue is a townhouse mansion that is at least 40 feet wide. A man stumbled along the sidewalk, ascended the stairs, and entered the house. He floated in the direction of the front door. He continued to drift, this time through the lavish first floor of the deserted mansion. He drifted in the direction of the light and noise coming from upstairs. Up a flight of stairs. Down a corridor. Up a second flight of stairs. At the top of these steps was a light. Into the master bedroom. Into a closet the size of the majority of apartments in New York. Tailored suits in rows and rows and rows. There must be 500 neckties hanging past a column. In the direction of the master bathroom, which has polished silver and shiny white tile. Enji Todoroki desperately splashed water on his face after being scraped and singed by the explosion. His face was dripping as he looked up into the mirror. He looked more closely at his face. There was an odd thing going on. The features weren't solid. Instead, they were melting and moving, like Enji had spilled some really strong acid. To his dismay, his face actually split in two, ripping straight down the middle, and one entire face slithered out of his own, positioning itself next to it. However, this was an ugly face that only vaguely resembled his own. It had a sickening greenish tint and was grotesque and mechanical. If anything, it resembled the insect-like helmet that was used to operate the flying glider back in the Toto Corp lab. The voice of the second face was similar to Enji's, but it was distorted and non-human. This was the voice of the Endeavor. Endeavor uttered, "Enji." Enji exclaimed, Who are you? I am the voice you refuse to hear. The dream you're afraid to remember. Endeavor stated. Enji asked, What do you want? Endeavor remarked, To say what you won't. To do what you can't. Enji asked, What do you mean? The words, You already know, came from Endeavor. Enji shook his head horribly, saying, No, not that. It appears that he is aware of this. Endeavor said, There is a weak link. No, exclaimed Enji. Endeavor described it as a threat to the company. Don't talk like that, exclaimed Enji. Endeavor declared, One day he will destroy it. Don't say these things, exclaimed Enji. Endeavor said, Lay waste to your grandfather's company. Enji said, Please. Endeavor stated, Unless he's stopped. Before it's too late. That isn't true, exclaimed Enji. Endeavor said, You believe it is. I've never thought that, exclaimed Enji. Endeavor remarked, You think that every day. Enji remarked, But my God, Abraham was willing. He had the strength, so too do I. Endeavor stated. Enji exclaimed, What are you going to do? The face started to shift, horrifyingly returning to Enji's own face. Endeavor said, Protect the company. As the Endeavor blended back into him, Enji screamed and clutched his head, It hurts. God, no, please, Enji uttered. Find the weak link. Make a sad effort. He's my son, exclaimed Enji. Endeavor said, Break it in two. Attack. Shoto Todoroki's expression was one of wonder and childlike innocence as he gazed up into the sky. Shoto remarked, Isn't it great? On a lovely early winter morning, Shoto and Reiko found themselves in the center of Columbus Circle's crowd. As the Thanksgiving Day parade headed down Central Park West toward Broadway and Times Square, enormous balloons floated high in the air. Shoto glanced down at the tickets he was holding. Shoto exclaimed, Come on, our seats are right up front. Taking her hand, he guided her to a nearby reviewing stand with tall, three-story bleachers. These were the pricey seats on the reviewing stand. A grim-faced foreign leader was seated next to the mayor of New York. The mayor used interpreters to have a conversation. Ah, yes, that one is Snoopy, a sort of devil-may-care dog who flies his doghouse around and pretends to be a World War I pilot. The mayor responded. The foreign leader appeared perplexed despite the interpreter's interpretation. The mayor asked his assistant, World War I. The Great War. War to end all wars. Did they sit that one out? Shoto and Reiko arrived nearby and took their seats. Loaded down with cameras, Izuku Midoriya navigated his way through the crowd in the street. Lifting his camera, he managed to capture a few images. Izuku scanned the crowd through his lens and noticed Kuri with the police, pointing and giving commands while the other officers gazed at her in wonder. Izuku reddened. She was fantastic. Izuku's spider sense went off as he abruptly stopped what he was doing on the street and rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't see anything when he looked around. The mayor was still giving it his all with the foreign leader on the reviewing stand. Oh, here comes Garfield, my favorite. Garfield is a wonderful sort of, sarcastic cat. The mayor responded. The interpreter had a perplexed expression. Sarcastic cat. Do you not know what to call that? The mayor said. The mayor turned and heard a high-pitched whining sound, as did everyone else in the vicinity. Izuku was going crazy on the street, certain that something was wrong but unsure of its location. He looked up. A tiny, incredibly swift object darted in and out of the clouds in the sky. The mayor was squinting up into the sky on the reviewing stand, where the buzzing was coming from. Well, that one must be new this year because I'm not familiar with it, the mayor remarked. He lifted his binoculars. A deranged cackle resounded over the jet engine turbines whine in midair. Curry had also seen it on the street, and as the object descended low, she shoved the police officers to the ground. It zigzagged through the floats so quickly that nobody could really grasp it. It must be part of the act because the audience cheered. The foreign leader, on the reviewing stand, smiled for the first time and applauded, liking this part. Curry's eyes glowed silver, but the police on the street relaxed, assuming it was part of the show. Izuku, she muttered, meeting his gaze across the throng. Then, out of nowhere, she was gone. Sensing trouble, Izuku pushed his way through the crowd and headed down the street toward the entrance to an alley. Whatever it is curled up into the sky, banked, and hovered directly over them in midair, giving them their first good look. It was Endeavor, dressed in form-fitting dark green with a distinctly military appearance, his face blazing with red fire, and he was using the flames to power the glider. The glider instantly reacted, banking and falling, straight down toward the street. Endeavor's head twitches, his flame flares. The crowd screamed and dispersed as he flew straight down into the center, and he slammed toward the police before being stopped by Miko's barrier. Endeavor retrieved a small flaming pumpkin-shaped grenade from an armament pouch mounted on the glider's side and dropped it onto her barrier. With a flick of his hand, Miko contained the grenade in a barrier before launching it into the air and detonating it to the audience's applause. While he cackled wildly and threw pumpkin bombs everywhere, Endeavor raced around Columbus Circle at chest level, causing people to scream and jump out of his way. With a quick barrier over the civilians, Miko looked up at the sky, which was a new moon, and shuddered as her power was waning. When Endeavor got to the end of the street, it shot straight up into the sky and vanished into the clouds. Izuku completes the covert installation of a camera on a second-story balcony in an alley, pointing it at the reviewing stand, setting the shutter to automatic, and beginning to unbutton his shirt to reveal his Deku costume underneath. Zap boom. On the street, a pumpkin bomb detonated in a brilliant orange boom that, for a brief moment, transformed everything into an X-ray image, revealing the skeletons of the police officers gathered around it as the blast subsided. I am unable to see. Police screamed and shouted. The other officers, who had all met the same end, totally blind, began yelling as well. Reiko and Shoto, who were also blind, shouted in shock and alarm as they threw their hands to their faces on the reviewing stand. As the other bombs detonated, one after the other, like a ring of light bulbs popping off all around Columbus Circle, Endeavor, high above them, looked down with joy. Miko swayed as her disguise shimmered, threatening to reveal her secret identity. Her eyes were completely silver, impervious to the bombs. Her barriers faded and vanished. With the last of her strength, she managed to drive an arrow into the ground and prevent the stand from collapsing as the disguise finally failed and her body faded, appearing next to Reiko and Shoto. Curry. Reiko sensed her presence in the atmosphere. Yes, Curry shouted. People scrambled and screamed as the reviewing stand lurched off to one side, swaying, two of its supports blown out by the bombs. In midair, Endeavor whirled his glider around and fell directly toward the reviewing stand, its nose aimed at Shoto Todoroki, over the cries of agony rising from the street below. Curry braced herself and aimed her final weapon, a magicless wooden arrow, at the goblin. A sharp-pointed spear on the nose rotates into position as Endeavor presses a switch on the glider's center console. Shocked, Shoto looked up. With wild laughter, Endeavor flipped a switch. The spear shot out of the glider, headed directly for Shoto, and, thwip. Just inches from Shoto's chest, a single web strand appears out of nowhere, catches the spear, and flips it away. The goblin looked up in midair, amazed, and then, thwip thwip thwip. A torrent of black web strands curled around his glider's engine, pulling it down to street level and tying it to a cement post. Endeavor and glider were jerked to a sudden stop on the street, and he glared around for anyone who might dare to stop him. Deku calmly descended from a light post behind the goblin, hanging upside down from a web, as chaos and panic swept through the surrounding streets. Deku said, "Hey." Enraged, Endeavor spun around. Deku declared, "I wear the tights in this town." "How?" With his legs still straddling his glider, Deku unleashed a powerful punch that sent the goblin flying back across the street. He collided with a wall. Curry, Reiko, and Shoto remained in the center of the swaying stand, like skaters on thin ice, while rivets cracked and burst out of the reviewing stand above them. Curry said, "Oh, no," and passed out. Endeavor got back up on his glider in the street, spun around, and yelled at Deku. "I'll destroy you if you get in my way," Endeavor stated. Spider-Man said, "Get out of my way or I'll destroy you, please." After slicing the web strand that bound the glider with a boomerang he pulled from his bag, Endeavor hit the acceleration button, sending the glider hurtling forward and directly toward Deku. At the last second, the web slinger leapt and landed 3 stories up on the side of a building. Below, Endeavor was traveling too quickly to halt and passed through an office building's open door. At top speed, Endeavor's glider crashed through a window on the opposite side of the lobby, emerged from the opposite street, looped up over the buildings in between, and then plummeted down once more, directly in the direction of Deku, who remained on the building's side. With his legs straddling him, Spidey landed squarely on top of the goblin's shoulders after flattening himself against the building and letting go as the glider scraped past. The glider rocketed down the street, spinning repeatedly as Endeavor screamed and lost control of it. At last, Endeavor took charge again. "Deku, I'm warning you. I don't steal purses or grab chains. You and I are alike. You are not all that I am," Endeavor stated. Spidey sailed through the air, and smacked neatly up against the side of a glass building, splay-legged, after Endeavor threw a furious punch that sent Deku flying off the glider. Shoto and Reiko were among those on the reviewing stand who were frantically trying to get off the swaying bleachers by climbing across them. Between them, a massive support beam broke and fell, crashing through the bleachers. Standing unsteadily, Curry saw the beam fall before it did and shoved Reiko aside, pinned beneath him. Shoto heard Reiko scream, but he was unable to see her to assist her, so he clawed at his eyes. "Reiko," Shoto declared, "I'm fine." Reiko approached him and said, "We must assist Curry." As Endeavor circled around for another pass from above, Deku turned on the side of the building and saw something even more terrifying behind Endeavor. Curry, trapped inside the collapsing reviewing stand, with Shoto and Reiko attempting to reach her. "Curry," Deku remarked. Deku launched a web onto the building across the street as the glider swooped in, low and hard, and he jumped out of the way at the last second, swinging out into the air. Endeavor pulled out a boomerang and threw it from the glider. The boomerang flew through the air and cut across Spidey's hand in midair. The boomerang severed Deku's webbing and made a long, jagged cut across his palm, causing him to scream in agony. Endeavor screamed with delight as the boomerang doubled back toward him after he saw the cut on the glider. Deku plummeted toward the pavement in midair, falling straight down. Endeavor saw the blood glistening on the edge of the glider, caught his boomerang, and watched Deku fall. Deku reached out and grabbed hold of a flagpole that protruded from the side of a building in midair, just 2 stories away from becoming a smashed spider. His grip was strong, and he flipped around it twice before releasing himself, sailing through the air, and landing on a rooftop, hard, rolling over, moaning in excruciating pain, clutching a badly wrenched ankle. Boards are collapsing on the reviewing stand, and the entire rickety thing was on the verge of collapse. No one was assisting Curry, who was stuck in the center of it all with her leg pinned beneath the beam, while everyone else was scrambling to get off it. A beam smashed through the wood next to Shoto, splintering it, and rivets flew off in all directions like crossfire as he struggled to reach her with his outstretched hand. Shocked, Shoto retreated. "I'll get assistance," Shoto declared. "No, my sister cannot be left here." Reiko uttered those words. After hesitating, Shoto turned around and climbed off the bleachers. "Shoto!" Reiko snarled at him and pursued him. The helicopters covering the parade were in the air, racing toward the scaffolding after spotting the reviewing stand. A massive beam on the reviewing stand grown 10 feet above Curry at a 45-degree angle. The question is, would she be there when it fell? Curry put her abilities to the test while attempting to flee, but they abandoned her. In an attempt to wrench her leg out from under the beam, she pulled harder. Deku leapt to his feet on the rooftop below, saw Curry above him, ran, threw himself off the building's side, and landed on the scaffolding, about 30 or 40 feet below her, and began climbing straight up toward her. Curry could see the helicopters approaching from above. Grateful to God, "Please assist me." Curry pretended to be an innocent bystander. "Some help." The doors opened, the helicopters came, and they aimed their cameras at her. Deku was coming from below. Hang on, Deku remarked. The groaning beam trembled and started to fall as she looked up. Deku threw himself the final few feet and landed directly over Curry in the center of the wreckage. In an amazing display of strength, he catches the falling beam and holds it aloft with one hand. Gritting his teeth, he reached down with the other hand and raised the beam holding Curry in place. When she struggled to free herself, Deku yelled as he threw the beam away from them. Eventually, the bleachers collapsed, beams falling directly at them. There was no way he could stop these. With one arm, he grabbed Curry, bent his legs, and leapt 3 stories straight into the air. At the top of his leap, he launched a web that caught on a building's side, and he swung away as the scaffolding collapsed in a potentially fatal rumble of metal and wood. Curry was ecstatic as she gazed at Spidey. Curry said, I knew you'd come. Deku noticed that she appeared weaker and different in some way, but he couldn't be certain if this was due to the trauma. Shoto Todoroki and Reiko, who were racing across the street with 2 firefighters, came to a halt as they saw Curry and Deku swing out over the city. Shoto and Reiko were buffeted by the crowd as they were surrounded by a flurry of people. Endeavor landed his glider on a rooftop and leapt off, looking down from the edge and realizing that he would never see Shoto again in the thronging crowd. Glancing up, he saw Deku soaring across the city, the goblin's face fixed in a terrible, determined grimace. Deku, I might not be able to kill you, but I'll make you wish you were dead if it's my final act. Endeavor stated. Deku made a landing on a distant rooftop and set Curry down softly. Deku said, this is where you get off. Curry asked, promise. She grabbed him as he turned to leave. You're bleeding, exclaimed Curry. When the boomerang slashed his hand, she took out a handkerchief and wrapped it around it. Curry asked, does that hurt? In heaven, thrilled by her touch, he shook his head. Feeling him, she ran her hand over his arm. Curry exclaimed, wow, gently. She ran her other hand across his chest. Curry said, you are built. She pretended not to be aware of this, acting as though her enchanted gaze wasn't always fixed on him. Deku said, I got to go. He leapt onto the building's side and performed a mid-air flip, clinging to the wall upside down just above her head. Hey, don't I get to say thank you this time? Said Curry. Leaning in close to him, she stretched up on her tiptoes. Open-mouthed, she kissed him, running her lips over the exterior of his mask. He leaned in to give her a long kiss, almost swooning. Deku said, I really gotta go. However, he remained motionless. Breathy and close, she whispered. How come? Got a Mrs. Deku waiting somewhere? Curry asked. He turned and flew, vanishing over the building's edge. As Curry hurried forward, he saw him swing into the city. She was out of breath. Curry smiled and said, amazing. Shoto Todoroki appeared taken aback as a door opened. Dad, you're early. Enji Todoroki entered the apartment with a few proprietary steps. He was perspiring. Enji said, Happy Thanksgiving to you too. You're not going to believe what happened at the parade. Reiko and I were almost. Shoto made an attempt. Enji replied, I know. I heard all about it. He took a seat beside Reiko on the couch and used a handkerchief to dab at the perspiration on his brow. Guilt-ridden, he glanced up at Shoto. Enji asked, Are you all right, son? Shoto said, I'm fine. Enji shot him a worried glance. Really? Thanks for asking. Reiko sulked. I'm fine too, thanks. She was ignored by Enji. Shoto, I know I've let you down. On occasion. In the past. He looked irritably at Reiko and wished she wasn't there, but he needed to vent. Let's just say, I didn't know what I was doing. And that it won't happen again. Enji replied. With curiosity, Shoto said, Thanks, Dad. Hey, why don't we have a Thanksgiving dinner? I didn't make anything, but the 4 of us could go out. All of a sudden, Enji was himself again. Can't today, working, but I'd be happy to pick up your check. Where's this new tenant of ours? I'm afraid I need to meet him and go. He's not a tenant, he goes to school with me. He's an amigo. Shoto replied. Outside the apartment complex, whoosh, Shoto's friend, currently known as El Hombre Arana, fell on the side of his apartment complex and was hurt. Favoring his wounds, he turned clumsily and crawled down several stories. He located his window, opened it, and scuttled inside. The bedroom of Izuku. Izuku dropped to the floor in his bedroom after removing his mask. His ankle was killing him, and the cut on his hand was causing him to bleed. Living area. He hit the floor, and they heard a thud. Enji remarked, "Speak of the devil. That's weird, I didn't know he was here." Shoto replied. Izuku. Kuri stood up and went to his bedroom, worried about his injuries. The bedroom of Izuku. Wild-eyed, he spun around and glanced at the door. He heard Kuri's voice calling to him and saw shadows shifting in the light beneath it. He carried a bundle of street clothes while still wearing his costume and taking off his mask. Living area. Kuri had almost reached the door. Just behind her were Shoto and Enji. They all saw nothing when she opened it and turned the handle. There was nobody in the room. Leaning over her, Enji looked around the room. It's a bit of a mess, with clothing, books, and science supplies all over the place. No Izuku, though. Clutching his bundle of street clothes under his arm, Izuku, dressed in full costume but without his mask, clung to the ceiling just 2 feet above their heads. He examined his right hand. Just above Osborn's head, a large, fat drop of blood was leaking from the wound. Izuku nibbled on his lip. Enji said, "Tell him we don't have maid service." After the blood drop fell, Enji turned to leave. He was standing there when the drop struck the light-colored carpet. The last person in the doorway, Enji, froze and cocked his head at the noise. "Man, good hearing." Enji turned and walked back to his position while the other two went. Spidey's eyes grew wide on the ceiling. Oh no. He was directly beneath Enji. Enji knelt and examined the carpet. He noticed the blood drop. He glanced quickly at the ceiling above him. No one was present. He pivoted and observed the open window. He strolled over to it. Enji approached, leaned out, and peered in both directions while Deku, clinging to the building's side, curled over the window. He turned and returned inside, apparently satisfied. Spidey exhaled with relief. Shoto's apartment's front door opened once more. Now wearing street clothes, Izuku made an effort to enter casually. "Did you see it? Did you see what happened? Man, I hope I got a decent picture." Izuku replied. "Pete, there you are. This is my father, Enji Osborn." Shoto replied. Izuku exclaimed, "Oh, pleasure to meet you, sir." Kuri grinned slyly. "Likewise," said Enji. Osborn moved to the front. Izuku forgot and held out his right hand, the cut one that had been hurriedly wrapped. Izuku gasped as Osborn took it and squeezed. Enji said, "Sorry, hurt your hand." He pulled Izuku's hand into view, still holding it. Izuku said, "Broken glass. Landed on it." Reiko asked, "You landed on it?" "Yeah, I'm an idiot. I was trying to get a picture of that thing in the sky and I stepped right out in front of a taxi. Must have knocked me 20 feet. Izuku replied. Enji said, "Better have me take a look at it." Osborn removed the handkerchief from Izuku's hand and unwrapped it, exposing the sharp cut caused by the goblin's boomerang. Osborn's eyes grew wide as he met Izuku's gaze. "You've got to be more careful in the streets. This city's full of lunatics," Enji replied. Izuku gave a nervous nod. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Spider sense is going crazy. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck and furrowed his brow, unable to solve it. "Just a few cuts and scrapes. I'll be fine," Izuku replied. He hobbled to the couch, avoiding Osborn's stare, and Kuri assisted him in sitting down, worried. Osborn observes him walking and examines his limp, pondering, constantly reflecting. Observing Osborn's scowl, Izuku sat. "What's happening?" Osborn just gave Izuku a long, hard stare while Shoto and Reiko began to bombard him with questions. He glanced down at Izuku's still-held handkerchief, which was covered in blood. It was tucked into his pocket. Kuri held Izuku's hand tightly. Enji nodded toward the hallway, asking Shoto to accompany him. "I really should be going." Shoto. Osborn and Shoto left the apartment in the hallway. Behind him, Osborn pulled the door almost shut. Not completely closed, though. "A word to the not-so-wise. That little tart will be gone at the first sign of trouble and she'll take half your trust fund with her." Enji responded. Shoto said, "Don't talk about Reiko like that." Enji clarified, "I wasn't talking about Reiko. That other girl, she's cheap and dangerous." "But," said Shoto. Enji said, "I'm not finished." Izuku stood in the doorway with angry eyes and said, "Oh, I think you are." A brief silence. Enji said, "I'll be going then," and departed. At Izuku's side, Kuri pulled his body into her arms as it shook with rage. "It's all right, Izuku. Thank you." Shoto was standing at his apartment window, gazing down at the street far below. He noticed Izuku and Reiko having an urgent conversation. He approached a telescope that was aimed over the park. In order to gaze at them, he swung it down into place. He saw Reiko and Izuku speaking urgently through the telescope lens, with Izuku comforting her, touching her arm, and arguing for Shoto. After listening, Reiko gave Izuku a casual embrace akin to that of a brother, but Shoto didn't see it that way. Shoto's massive eye watched them through the opposite lens, the embracing couple reflected in his glassy pupil. The eye grew wide, and jealousy emerged. Next to the headline, the Daily Bugle featured a front-page photo of Deku and Endeavor engaged in combat atop the Goblin Glider. Deku, try to scare the city. Below the image, in the corner of the page where a small photo credit was printed. Izuku Midoriya's photo, in the office of Jameson. The paper in Jameson's office crumpled, revealing Jonah Jameson's face as he chewed a cigar with pride. Incidentally, there is a framed picture of a young, attractive astronaut on the wall behind Jameson. Nervous, Izuku Midoriya stood across from him. You like that, Endeavor? I made it myself, Jameson said with a smile. They all have to have a name since Deku. Hoffman, copyright the name Endeavor and give the patent office a call. Every time someone says it, I want a quarter. Deku was attempting to save the city, not tormenting it. How could you say that? It's libel, Izuku protested. Are you his attorney? Jameson retorted. It is slander, Izuku sobbed. So let him sue me, Jameson said sloppily, and get rich like a normal person. That's what makes this country gawk. That, gak, was caused by a long, steely claw that suddenly wrapped around Jameson's throat and squeezed. Jameson's entire body lifted into the air. Izuku gasped and leapt back. Jameson choked for air, and Shigaraki climbed through Jameson's office window, making sure everyone could see that everything he touched turned to dust. Hands were gripping every part of him. His hands went around Jameson's throat without touching it. Everyone in the room froze. Jameson was able to stutter out a few sentences. Who are you? The villain growled. I am Tamura Shigaraki. Where is Izuku Midoriya? Izuku's gaze expanded. He stopped. Jameson gasped, choked, and was unable to speak. He was getting red in the face. Put me down, he says. With one arm still holding Jameson's torso in place, Shigaraki let go of his throat and slammed him back to the ground. Izuku's hand naturally reached for his shirt, which concealed his Deku costume, but where could he change? He started for the door, but a mist-based villain arrived first, slammed it shut, and locked it against the people rushing up to it from the outside. Continue, Tamura. Again, Shigaraki said. Midoriya, I said. The photographer who took the picture. Where is he? Jameson lied. He isn't here. Quite unexpectedly. He's a freelancer. We don't even know where he lives. Smack. The table was kicked by Shigaraki. Another villain, this one wearing black, seized Jameson's phallum as the hands returned to his throat. Squeezed. You're lying. Jameson parted his lips, but nothing came out. Izuku inhaled deeply. He was aware of his obligations. I'm Izuku Midoriya. All four of the villains in the room turned to face Izuku right away. Shigaraki was there, decked out in handguns. Kurogiri, composed of mist and smoke. Twice, in a mask and twitching. And Spinner, a man with a lizard-like appearance. Jameson fell to the carpet as Shigaraki let him go. The hands encircled Izuku's neck like vipers in the air. He was afraid to move. Who is the man in the mask, Endeavor? Shigaraki asked. Why? Izuku blurted out without thinking. This was not what Izuku expected. Incorrect response. The hands clenched and almost touched him, but he was able to move in time thanks to danger sense. I have business with him. Who is he? Izuku lied and said, I don't know. I never saw his face. Shigaraki was furious. He looked at Izuku more intently, grabbed his chin twice, and turned to face his supervisor. Then how did you get that picture? Izuku felt confined. Got lucky. Right place at the right time. Shigaraki thought about him. I'll be watching you, Izuku Midoriya. In case you're ever lucky again. Shigaraki turned and went back toward the window with his group. Regaining his composure, Jameson stumbled to his feet and rubbed his neck. Next time call for an appointment, Jameson said. Doctor, dissolver. Smack, slap, quick, off. Jameson was struck by the villains in the 1 ribs, 2 cheek, 3 gut, and 4 chin. In agony, he doubled over. Don't call me that, yelled Shigaraki. We're the League of Villains. If you see Endeavor, tell him we have his son. Izuku went pale. Shoto, alright, we'll refer to him as Dr. Dissolver from now on. Dr. Dissolver vanished in an instant. Jameson and Izuku rush over, Jameson still moaning in agony. Leaning out the window, they peered down. Through the window, they noticed a warped cloud. People screamed, pointed, and saw as cars collided in the street. It's not too inexpensive, and quite the sight. Jameson remarked, city just isn't the same since Rudy's gone. Enji Todoroki took Izuku's bloody handkerchief out of his pocket and examined it in his dressing room at home. He held up his other hand. The goblin's boomerang, its serrated edge red with crusty blood, was in his hand. The blood of Deku. Clutched in the hand of an assistant, a piece of paper bearing the bold words lab report at the top slipped across the pricey rug in Enji Todoroki's Toto Corp office. As the aide hurried out of the room, the paper slid across the desk to Enji, who pulled it around and examined it. His gaze swept across the page, past the words, blood match test result, and all the way down to a single red boxed word at the bottom. Positive. Enji Todoroki grinned. Izuku Midoriya. Alone and dejected, Kuri gazed out the open window of her shoddy apartment, taking in the fresh snow and blasts of cold air. With a yearning gaze, she peered out the window at the city, scanning its rooftops for Deku. Izuku was wearing her flannel back at her childhood home. Nightgown, preparing to go to sleep. She smoothed the pillow and carefully lowered the bed. She passed a window on her way to her bathroom. The curtains remained open. She filled a glass with water, carried it to the night table, and carried it back past the window. She placed it beside a pile of bottles of prescription medication on the nightstand. With her back to the window, she turned and knelt beside the bed. She closed her eyes and folded her hands in prayer as her knees ached. Our Heavenly Father, who is, hallowed be your name. The drapes were still open behind her. A tiny speck emerged on the horizon outside the window. However, that speck was getting closer. Inku had no idea why she was kneeling with her back to the wall. Your will is fulfilled, your kingdom arrives, as it is in heaven on earth. The speck quickly grew larger. It was Endeavor, flying with fire and heading straight for the window. However, just as he was about to smash through it, he abruptly stopped and stared inside. Give us our daily bread today. Endeavor's helmet cocked off to the side like the RCA dog, and he tilted his head as though he was listening to her odd murmuring. And pardon us for our transgressions as we pardon trespassers against us. Led us away from temptation, but Endeavor hit the gas and shot forward with an unfathomable surge of acceleration, blasting through the window, sending glass fragments flying everywhere. Horrified, Inku whirled around and collapsed on her back. The room slowly filled with green vapor and the terrible crackle of flames, and Endeavor hovered over her terrified face. However, with only 12 inches separating her from the yellow, inhuman eyes of Endeavor's helmet, Inku paled and her eyes widened. Get it done. End it, she gasped as her hands gripped her chest. Deliver us from evil. Her eyes closed, her body arched, tensed, then went limp. Endeavor said piously, Amen. Across the street, the awful cackles of the Endeavor filled the night in the neighborhood. With his hand still on the receiver, Shoto Todoroki stood over the phone in his apartment and looked up to deliver some depressing news. She's gone. Izuku had just emerged from his bedroom. Kuri, man, she recently broke up with her boyfriend, Shoto remarked. She is infatuated with someone else. Who? Izuku exclaimed excitedly. Shoto glanced at him and said, I wonder. What? Izuku said naively. You can't pull it off. Take that naive expression off your face. I was friends with her boyfriend. Don't be joyful if all you do is hurt people. The telephone began to ring. Golden boy, don't things just come to you? You just need to want it, Shoto went on, adding that you don't even need to try. The mines. The grades. This apartment alone was insufficient, you also needed the girl. Izuku shot back, man, you're way out of line. You're paranoid. You have no idea what you're discussing. The phone continued to ring as Shoto gazed down at Izuku for a long time. Shoto grabbed the phone and said, We're not done. Yes, what? After a protracted silence, he turned to face Izuku, his face pale. Someone broke into your mom's house. Shoto said, his voice broken. She's. Before he could finish speaking, the apartment building's front door flew open, and Izuku hurried outside to the curb in search of a cab. Desperate, Izuku dashed into the morning rush hour traffic, which was so congested that even if he found a cab, it wouldn't be able to move. Izuku drove off down a side street after pounding the hood of a car out of frustration. The driver yelled out the window, horns honked, and chaos ensued. Izuku ducked into an alley and used his other means of transportation, throwing himself at the side of a building while still wearing his street clothes and starting to climb with Black Whip while shrugging off his injured ankle. Without even stripping down to his hero suit, Izuku grabbed the rooftop of the building, slung out Black Whip, and flew across the city. Izuku checked room numbers as he hurried down a hospital hallway. When he got to the final room on the right, he ducked inside and saw Inko, in a hospital bed, half-conscious, with two nurses at work on her. She appeared rough. The nurses glanced up, noticed Izuku, and gestured for him to approach. Izuku approached the bed and grasped his mother's thin, papery hand. Izuku's own eyes welled with tears as she turned to look at him through milky blue eyes. Izuku cried, "I'm sorry. I should have been there with you. I ought to have been present." "Those eyes. The eyes of the devil," Inko muttered. "Whose eyes? Who was it?" Izuku inquired. "Dreadful yellow eyes." Inko rolled over and fell back into unconsciousness, shuddering in fear at the memory. "Oh my god," Izuku's own eyes opened. "She must not mean." Head hung low, a figure trudged up the steps of the Todoroki mansion, just off Park. Shoto Todoroki tiptoed up the townhouse's stairs and made his way to the end of a long, dark hallway with the light on. He heard an angry muttering from the room at the end of the hall, but he was unable to understand what it was saying. "Dad," Shoto made a call. From this distance, they conversed, and Enji Todoroki, who was only a dark shadow, entered the hallway startled and wearing ordinary clothes. Shoto remarked, "You were right about Curry, too. You were right about Reiko. She may be in love with Izuku, in my opinion." "Izuku, Midoriya?" Enji asked, moving closer in this lengthy corridor. "And does he love her as well?" With a bitter tone, Shoto asked, "Are you kidding? He tries to deny it, but he's been in love with her since he was 12 years old." "Really?" Enji smiled wildly. "What a tangled web." Shoto put one hand over his face to conceal his embarrassment and the fact that he had started crying. The words, "I'm sorry," Shoto wailed. "You must think I'm really weak. I know you despise me, Dad." "Oh my god." "Shoto," Enji whispered. "No, Shoto, you must never say that. It makes no difference what has happened to us in the past. I adore you. I will do everything in my power to support you because I love you." At last, Enji entered a puddle of light directly in front of his son. "What kind of dad do you think I am?" Enji asked with complete sincerity. Izuku was sitting a lonesome vigil beside Inku's bed in the dark, in and out of consciousness, when he heard a faint tapping sound coming from the door behind him and turned. Izuku glanced at Curry, who was standing in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers, before turning his gaze back to his mother. They spoke in low tones as Curry entered, put the flowers down, leaned over, and wrapped her arms around Izuku's neck, hugging him until he closed his eyes, nearly crying. "Will she be all right?" Curry inquired. Izuku uttered the words tentatively, "Maybe, maybe not." Almost against his will, words poured out of him, whispering in low tones. "No matter how hard I try, the people I love are always there," Izuku remarked. "The ones who make the payments." Curry remarked, "I know it feels like your fault. I've been there. My mom was killed. I was furious. At the bad guy who murdered her. At the police, who didn't believe my visions and were incompetent. And who gave a damn about my grams. And you know what? I went out there, and did something about it," Curry said, holding his hands and meeting his gaze. Izuku looked into her eyes, wondering what she was saying, that he should beat Endeavor outside. How much did she know? Panic and confusion clashed as he quickly got up and made his way to the door. Curry tried, "Hey, wait, Looking at her inches from him, he turned back sharply, grabbed her by the shoulders, and pulled her close to him, confusion and rage brewing. She was the most beautiful thing on the planet, and he had never been more powerful, not as Izuku Midoriya, anyway. If you know about me being," he stopped and tried again. "Curry, if you know, whatever you think you know, just forget it, if I could just tell you." She glanced at him as he barely managed to stop himself. Izuku. His name had never sounded so lovely as it did when she spoke it, my god. Curry approached. Izuku. Was there a shadow of something else there? Could it be She was really examining him, looking into his eyes. Izuku, I know who you. He shoved her away with too much force, expecting her to crash into the wall with the power of one for all, crushing her small body, but she straightened as if it were his weak old self pushing her. Suddenly, Izuku's face turned to steel, like a cell door closing. Avoid coming near me. People get hurt, Izuku sobbed. I love you. It operates that way. Unbeknownst to him, Kuri took a mask from her purse and followed him as he turned and hurried off down the hospital corridor. With tears streaming down his cheeks, Izuku stood in the Midoriya house's living room, where he had constructed a fiery fire in the fireplace. He was holding his costume tightly in his right hand and gazing down at it. He glanced up at a photo of himself with All Might that had been taken a few years prior on the mantel. As he gazed, he gripped his costume tightly, his hand shaking from the pain, uncertainty, and decision. He threw his costume into the flames. The sheer fabric curled and melted, the stenciled spider outline warped and dripped down into the flames, the orange tongues licked up and consumed it, and the flames roared. Izuku was in excruciating pain as he leaned against the mantel. A shadowy figure in an overcoat stood in the shadows outside the street lamp's arc of light in front of the Midoriya residence. With the drapes open, the dark figure gazed into the Midoriya house's living room, where Izuku was still leaning against the mantel and the fire was blazing brightly in the fireplace. The figure waited, lit a cigarette, opened a Zippo lighter, swatted a mosquito, and simultaneously unscrewed the streetlight's light bulb. Who do you think? Izuku left the living room of the house. Izuku entered the Midoriya home's bathroom and turned on the sink faucets. Concerned about Izuku, Kuri was hunched over her sink in her rundown bathroom, cupped water in her hands, and splashed it in her face. After splashing water on his face, Shoto Todoroki looked up into the mirror in a guest bathroom in Enji's townhouse, water dripping from his features. And Enji Todoroki was staring at his freshly splashed face in his lavish bathroom as well. He grabbed a towel, covered his face to dry it, and then pulled it away. An Endeavor gazed back at him. Enji stood motionless in front of the mirror, yelling in fear. He was horrified to see Endeavor's face break free of his own once more. This time, it didn't just appear next to his own face in the mirror, instead, it floated out of it and met Enji's gaze. A knock on the door caused Enji to tremble as he stood there, eyed a menacing eye with his alter ego. Dad, are you all right? Shoto inquired. Be straight down, son, Enji said tremblingly. As Shoto walked away, Enji heard his footsteps and turned back to Endeavor. Those unappreciative fools, Attempt yelled. Leave, Enji responded with a shout. They believe that treating a Todoroki in this manner is possible. Did they think there wouldn't be hell to pay? Exclaimed Endeavor. Go away from my son. Enji sobbed. Not only Osborne, the foolish son, but the harlot too. The intruder, all three of them need to be sent out, from a very high altitude. In an attempt to keep his sanity, Enji suddenly clutched his head in excruciating pain. I am Enji Todoroki. I am Enji Todoroki. I am Enji Todoroki. Enji is not strong. Enji fell to his knees, hands to his head, and Endeavor chanted back, Enji's a waste. And I'm right there with him. The Endeavor was liberated. On a chilly day in Central Park, Izuku was sitting on a park bench with his overcoat pushed back against the snow when someone passed by, turned, and took a seat. After a moment, Izuku felt a weird sensation and turned to face the person who had just taken a seat next to him. All Might was involved. Izuku let out a gasp, made some unintelligible noises, and All Might smiled mysteriously at him. You, All Might said, relax, young Midoriya. Izuku muttered, this isn't possible. Young Midoriya, it's a dream. You're still at home. At around 7 in the morning, you dozed off on the couch. In a few minutes, you will awaken. After a long moment of staring and taking in this information, Izuku threw himself across the bench, grabbed his hero, and gave him the tightest hug he could. Izuku was crying, of course, and All Might laughed, pleasantly surprised. Whoa. Every Might. God, I'm so sorry, I'm really sorry. Hey, he was stopped by All Might. He abruptly withdrew and placed his hands on Izuku's shoulders. All Might said, don't apologize to me. My life was my own. The day I was born I was a book that was already written, and my story ended how it was always meant to end. But you, here, now, today, you're a work in progress. There's so much I want to ask you, so much I want to tell you. All Might interrupted him, saying, I've only got a minute or two, before the doorbell wakes you up. Izuku muttered, I love her, All Might. With a sorrowful smile, All Might said, I know you do. All I'd have to do is tell her who I really am, and she'd be pretty easy, huh? Izuku gave a nod, sure would. All Might nudged, so why don't you tell her? Because she wouldn't be safe a single minute for the rest of her life. All Might gave him a questioning glance and asked, is that why? Knowing there was more, Izuku looked back at him. Partly. She needs to love you, young Midoriya. Not the guy in the mask. But burning that mask isn't the way to protect her, or yourself. You can't deny who you are, Deku. Izuku yelled, who I am. Because of who I am, you were killed. Mom almost who's next? How can I be sure no one else will get hurt? All Might said, you can't. It's called life. You can't bet on it. You can't manage it or control it. All you can do is lead the one you were meant to live. In the distance, a slight buzzing sound began. At the sound, All Might turned back to face Izuku. Young Midoriya, the only thing you need to know is who you are, everything else is just noise. Izuku turned, searching for the buzzing, and he saw the front door of his mother's house, standing right here on the grass in Central Park, with only a frame around it, next to the park bench. Through a thin glass window in the door frame, he could see a man standing outside the door, ringing the bell. Confused, Izuku turned to face All Might, but he had vanished, leaving him alone on the bench once more. When the buzzing resumed, Izuku turned to face. In actuality, a man stood at his mother's front door. The bell was ringing outside, visible through the thin glass window next to the door. Izuku sat up, still dressed in the same outfit as before, but groggy. A man in a black suit was standing in front of him when he went to the front door and opened it at night. Mioriya Izuku, did he ask? Yes. The man in the black suit turned and left after silently giving Izuku a creamy white envelope. Curious, Izuku glanced down at the envelope, opened it, and then his eyes widened after scanning the page. At Toto Corp, 4 lone figures approached the center of the plaza from 3 different directions in the early morning fog behind the red neon sign atop the imposing black Toto Corp building. The plaza and the building were empty at this hour. Izuku, on the ground, recognized one of the individuals approaching him as he made his way toward the plaza. Kuri and Reiko were there. Izuku turned to his left and saw that it was Shoto. In the center of the plaza, they crossed paths. All right, what are you looking for? Shoto inquired. Me, she sent me Izuku started. Kuri tried to say, Shoto, you're the one who. The 4 of them stared at each other in bewilderment after Reiko stopped her, but they didn't have to look long before they heard something whistling as it sailed through the air. They all took a step back, away from a pumpkin bomb, as it landed with a clunk about 20 feet away, whizzing out of the fog from above. It bounced twice, hard, and rolled to a stop right in the middle of them. Shoto exclaimed, oh, God. When the bomb exploded, they all leapt back. Stunned by the bomb's force, Shoto, Izuku, Reiko, and Kuri all crunched to the ground before the whistling sound returned. As the second pumpkin bomb exploded behind them, they leapt to their feet and took off, but a third pumpkin bomb thudded to the ground in front of them, so they changed their course once more and scamped away just before the third bomb exploded. Another pumpkin bomb dropped mysteriously out of the fog and landed to one side of them. In this manner, Shoto made a call. As he raced toward the twin glass elevators that ran up the side of the Toto Corp building, Izuku, Reiko, and Kuri followed. Shoto fumbled to key the elevator after whipping a set of keys out of his pocket. Behind them, another bomb went off. Shoto and Reiko hurried into the elevator as the doors whooshed open, but Izuku stopped in the doorway with a terrified expression on his face, and Kuri noticed and put a hand to the back of his neck. Be careful, Izuku's danger sense kicked in and he whispered. What? Reiko inquired. The lift. Stay out of it, Kuri warned them while glancing at Izuku, who gave her a curious look. Okay. Stay down here and die, Shoto snarled in frustration. Izuku took a step back, followed by Kuri, and the doors started to close as he jabbed one of the 2 silver buttons, the one with the large arrow pointing up. My dear, Reiko sobbed. However, the doors shut. Izuku was thrown to the ground when another bomb exploded behind him. Kuri noticed a strange object near the enormous wheel that was carrying the elevator cables, right at the base of the elevator's machinery. It was a pumpkin-shaped bomb. There was a chunk, and the elevator box started to rise as the wheel turned, pulling in the cable. When Reiko looked out the window of the ascending elevator, she saw her sister trapped in the middle of the explosion smoke in the plaza below. "Sis," she sobbed. Kuri watched as Izuku's hands darted up to his shirt, pulled it open, and felt underneath for his costume as she stood in the plaza and watched the elevator slowly rise. He burned it, so of course it wasn't there. Kuri fled silently after realizing she was the only hero present. As Izuku turned, thinking wildly, sirens began to sound in the distance, and people who had heard the explosions began to emerge from the fog. Izuku's eyes brightened as he frantically scanned his surroundings. A sign in the window of a gift shop across the street on. According to Broadway, Halloween costumes half off. He fled across the street and almost got struck by a car. Rushing in his direction, Izuku persisted even after the car stopped, and the driver, a man wearing a dark overcoat, got out. A hand slithered out from under the overcoat and slammed the car door, but it wasn't just any hand, it was a burnt, charred hand. Dobby was here. One of the Halloween costumes was a clown, a cowboy, Mr. Potato Head, Wolverine, aha. Izuku sprinted past it, yanked a Deku costume off the rack, tugged at the sleeves, and looked at the crotch. Izuku, dressed in the Deku costume, stood in front of the clerk at the register as a $20 bill fell to the counter. "May I wear it at home?" did he ask. The glass elevator continued to rise, higher and higher, toward the building's roof and above the city. Reiko turned to face Shoto, who returned her gaze. "Who is he?" Shoto growled. "What?" Reiko answered. "You're in love with someone else," Shoto snarled at her. "I've got a right to know who it is." "Shoto, for gods," Reiko attempted. "Who is he?" Shoto cried. 60 stories above the street, the elevator jerked to a stop as he reached out and pressed the stop button. The large greasy wheel inside the elevator stopped turning, the cable was stretched taut, and the red light on the pumpkin bomb next to it kept ticking. Miko glanced in at Shoto and Reiko, who were fighting outside the glass elevator, and heard a high-pitched whining coming closer from a distance. When Shoto and Reiko heard it, they turned abruptly, and Miko looked after them. The mist, as dense as cake icing, abruptly breaks up, swirling around Endeavor on his glider. He banked, came to a stop. Stopping outside the elevator is impossible. With a cackle, Endeavor took a remote control device from his goblin bag and flipped up the cover, revealing a red button glowing on its panel as Shoto and Reiko gaped in disbelief. "Goodbye, kids. You should be thrown out of the nest now." He hit the button. The bomb's glowing red light inside the elevator machinery became steady and began to beep. The cable broke, whirling and snapping up the shaft like a wild snake. Snap! Shoto and Reiko could see straight into the elevator shaft through the glass wall, where the cut cable sped past them, untying the elevator. They let out a scream, hovered like Wile E. Coyote for a moment, and then fell. Endeavor let out a gleeful screech, and then, Miko saved the day. But could she use her telekinesis to keep the elevator upright and steer it to a safe landing? No, she could hardly keep it in place. He saw the elevator hovering, about to fall, toward him as the amazing Deku swung in, splattered to a stop on the side of the Toto Corp building, close to the base. Crawling to the machinery panel on top of the elevator works, he opened the window, reached into the machine room, and caught the loose cable as it flew by. Slumping to the floor, Miko said, "Thank heavens. Well done, Deku. They haven't been saved yet." Deku gave her a frustrated glance as he moaned in agony, encircled the cable with both hands, and collapsed back to the floor, but it continued to fly through his hands. Endeavor screamed angrily from the top of his glider as he roared down the building. "No." Endeavor growled and kicked Miko to the ground as she raised her hands to assist with her quirk. "Stay out of this, interloper. It's between Deku and me." Miko, Shoto and Reiko had become weightless, and Deku had no time to save her before the elevator fell. "The ceiling is plastered with them." Miko muttered, "Save my sister," as Deku glanced between them in pain. As he squeezed the cable as tightly as he could, blood seeped through his gloves and Deku swore heartily, "I promise." He was in excruciating pain. Half a dozen tiny black-winged objects flew into the air as Endeavor opened fire, swarming over Deku with a terrible buzzing and beeping sound. Deku was compelled to remove one hand from the cable in an attempt to swat them away. He reached out and caught one, but he quickly let go and let out a painful cry. "Are my razor bats to your liking?" Endeavor smiled. Deku had to put both hands back on the cable to try to stop the elevator's deadly plunge as the razor bats swarmed around him, slashing his skin and costume. He looked up to see that the elevator was only 100 feet above the ground and still dropping. "Are you up for meeting the others?" Endeavor inquired. Another 6 were released when he flipped the bag inside out. In a desperate attempt to escape the black swarm that was slowly killing him, Deku leapt into the air while he was surrounded and being slowly sliced to ribbons. "Hang on, hold on." Deku sobbed and tightened his grip even more. At breakneck speed, the elevator came. When Endeavor reached into his bag once more, he pulled out a pumpkin bomb and put a boot down on Miko, causing her to scream and hurt Deku even more. However, the heroine bit her tongue and glared at Endeavor, which infuriated him so much that he pulled a hand back and threw the bomb, saying, "Now I'll kill them, hero. Their demise is due to your resistance." The hand began to move, but it was stopped in midair and caught by a burned and scarred hand. While the first hand grabbed the pumpkin bomb and threw it hundreds of feet into the air, the second burned hand grabbed Endeavor by the neck. Deku looked up in awe. Just as the bomb he threw exploded in the sky above, washing him over with brilliant light and thunderous noise, Dabi threw open his patchwork-burned arms, sending the overcoat flying off his shoulders. Deku tightened his hold on the cable one last time, grimacing. The elevator moaned to a stop and bumped to the floor as the lubricated, spinning wheel continued to slow down. With blood streaming down her face, Miko stood with her telekinesis assisting Deku and gave him a wink. Miko rushed to him, eager to heal him, as Shoto and Reiko fell to the elevator floor and the doors on Todo Corp Plaza slammed open, revealing the ongoing fight that included Endeavor, held high by a snarling, burning Dabi, and Deku, writhing in agony on the ground with his hands ripped to shreds by the elevator cable. Dabi snarled at him, "Thought you'd never see me again, didn't you, Enji? Don't you remember your son, Toya?" With wide eyes, Shoto turned to face Dabi. Was that his dad? What about his brother? With wide eyes, Deku turned to face Shoto. Was this the family of Todoroki? He was suddenly extremely appreciative of his mother and All Might. Dabi grinned and choked Enji in midair as blue flames rose all around them. "I've awaited this moment, Enji." With wide eyes, Shoto and Deku turned to face Endeavor. Was that Shoto's father? Dabi reached up and removed the dye from his hair with his free hand, revealing Toya Todoroki. Then he tore the helmet off Endeavor's head, exposing the insane face of Enji Todoroki beneath. You know, Deku, Shoto, Reiko, and Miko were startled. Enji let out a strange, thrashing scream. How? Enji crashed into an intact glass wall after Toya cracked him across the face. Weakened, he fell to the ground. Dabi pressed as Shoto and Reiko hurried from the elevator. Aiming for the kill, with fire burning over his head, he strode forward swiftly. You made me into a monster, exclaimed Dabi. You stole my life, and now I'm going to take yours. He held up his scarred hands, which were blazing blue. You hide behind a glider and toys, afraid to use your powers, hiding Shoto's and the others, but you will choke on my blue fire. He set Enji ablaze. These flames, this burned body, he exclaimed, forming a wall of flames in a circle. The flames that made me a monster. To bring the flames down on Enji, he lifts his charred hands above his head. Deku watched helplessly while rolling on the ground and clutching his bleeding hands in agony. Miko healed him while crouching over him. Shoto sobbed in agony. Stop him, please. Deku looked at Shoto, who was pleading with him. Miko looked at Shoto in disbelief. Heroes, rescuing a villain. Endeavor protected his head from the escalating flames and screamed, I'll kill you. But it was hollow. Then Shoto whimpered, he's my father. Deku could identify with thinking of All Might. He flipped his wrists up, rolled over, and sent out Black Whip, which bound Dabi's arms together with a thwip thwip thwip. Dabi was furious, but he was unable to set Black Whip on fire. As Dabi fell to the ground around him, he lost his hold on the pieces of cement and glass, giving Enji the moment he needed to roll out of the flames. No, exclaimed Dabi. He smacks Deku across the chest with his one free hand. Leaping to his feet, Deku retaliated. Unnoticed for a moment, Enji Todoroki rolled free, picked up his helmet, and put it back over his head while Deku and Dabi mixed it up. Once more, he lifted his wrist and pressed a button on a tiny touch panel. The glider reacted to the remote command from a short distance away, turning around and returning to him. Miko, however, would not have that. She pinned the glider to the wall with an arrow. You're facing me, you monster. You have to answer for what you've done to Shoto. Endeavor sighed and said, oh please. I'm above fighting a sidekick. I'm not a sidekick, growled Miko. I'm the holy priestess and cute heroine, Miko. Heavenly barrage. She pinned Endeavor down with hundreds of glowing arrows. Deku, in the meantime, grabbed Dobby's arms and legs and used Black Whip to webbing them up. Despite Dobby's cries and struggles, the whip held. Dobby was still unable to burn Black Whip despite the strength of that stuff. Through the deluge, Endeavor snatched up, Miko. I've seen the way he looks at you, you have his heart, and now I'm going to break it. Miko, exclaimed Deku. However, he wasn't yet heartbroken. So Endeavor followed Dobby's example and reached up, tearing off Miko's mask to reveal Kuri Hikawa, Deku's beloved. The glider whirled neatly and accelerated out into the empty sky as Endeavor's head twitched. Without hesitation, Deku fired Black Whip at the glider as it was leaving. The line stretched taut as it hit the glider's underside, briefly spun out, and jerked Deku off the ground. As Deku hung from the whip, Endeavor yelled down at him. Come on, let's see how you fly. Rip. Dobby eventually freed himself by tearing the webbing that held his limbs together. Through the dense fog, Endeavor drove the glider straight into the air. As Kuri struggled to get her hands around Endeavor's throat on the glider, he flexed his hand, choked, and a needle emerged from a hidden pad in his palm, reaching back and clamping his palm around her neck, piercing her skin. He caught her by one hand and pulled her back onto the glider as Kuri screamed and went limp. My little rider, don't act out your death scene just yet. Let's pause where there will be a crowd. When Endeavor spotted Deku crawling up the whip strand toward them below, he drew out a boomerang and cut straight through the whip strand. The earth was rushing up at Deku, swiftly and unavoidably, as he fell, tumbled through the sky over Tokyo. In an attempt to catch them on anything, he extended his arms and launched webs one after the other. Eventually, Black Whip adhered to the framework of a skyscraper that was still under construction. He flew through space, flipped over twice, and it tightened, changing the angle of his fall and turning it into a swing. And landed on the skyscraper's top girder, standing on an I-beam between a pair of builders. A few blocks away, over the East River, Deku noticed a swirl of helicopters, gathered around something, while the workers froze and stared at him. Deku remained silent, observing the horizon. The construction workers were left standing on the beam as Deku launched a web in that direction and leapt out into space. They turned, exchanged glances, and let out excited screams. All RIIIIIGHT. Near the Todo Corp building, Shoto Todoroki and Dobby were racing down the crowded street, which was now mostly heading toward the river. Dobby paused, looked up into the sky where everyone was pointing, and saw the police swarming in that direction, sirens blaring, helicopters whirring toward the scene as Shoto took off, into the crowd. No, don't put him under arrest. Dobby cried. He used his blue flames to lift him into the air. Let him die. He could be heard shouting over them. I have to exact my revenge. He staggered off in the direction of the bridge. Now that it was rush hour, the bridge was packed, so packed that cars were stopped, sirens were blaring, and half a dozen police and news helicopters were flying over the Manhattan skyline. Where Kuri was at Endeavor's feet, drugged but conscious and unable to stand, her power crackling around her like a force field, and Endeavor stood defiant, screaming a terrible laugh up to the heavens. The sirens, horns, roaring prop wash, howling wind, and police helicopters shouting commands at them created a deafening commotion. Hands and feet gripping the vertical high-tension wires, Deku swung into view and landed below. Thwip, he launched a web that adhered to one of the striking upsweep cables that ascended to the summit of the tower. Swinging out and down, Deku landed silently on the cable and started to crawl up its 30-degree angle, moving quickly and inhumanely. He scampered up the wires, moving more quickly and steadily than ever before, and he plucking his way nimbly toward his prey. Life will never be the same after this. The news cameras went crazy, but the helicopters swooped toward him. This was the best and longest look anyone had ever had at Deku. With his hands on his hips, Endeavor watched Deku's relentless approach from the top of the tower. Why look, the man who was coming to die with you is your boyfriend. Kuri crawled to the edge and peered down. Deku was approaching the cables, but the image was distorted and fuzzy, as she must have felt. Deku was almost at the top of the cables when he noticed something rolling directly at him, bumping into his hand and stopping. It was a bomb made of pumpkin. He reached for it, but it exploded too late, releasing a hazy vapor. It blew away from him, and he saw Kuri, focused, shielding him. He retreated and continued to crawl. Deku leapt to the top of the tower, then landed between Curry and the goblin after swinging himself straight over her. "I'm glad to see you." Curry was not quick enough, so Deku looked at him, blinked, and touched his eyes. Through Deku's eyes, we could see not one, but almost a dozen endeavors surrounding us. "How about we meet up?" After Deku lunged at the wrong endeavor, the real endeavor retaliated with a blow that knocked Deku to the ground. Zip! Endeavor flexed his hand, causing the needle point to emerge from his palm once more. "Be careful, don't let him," Curry sobbed. It was too late. The needle point did its job when Endeavor slapped his hand down on Deku's thigh. With a delighted smile, Endeavor pulled it out. The police officers on board the helicopters screamed their warnings and threats louder and louder as they swooped closer from above. Shoto Todoroki leapt out of a taxi that screeched to a stop in the middle of the heavy traffic on the bridge and looked up to see the battle raging overhead. Shoto turned and saw Dabi approaching him on his flames as the crowd screamed close to the bridge's entrance. With a mechanical hum, Dabi grabbed hold of a high-tension cable on a cable and closed it with his other hand. Now that he was locked onto the cable, he began pulling himself up, arm over arm, toward the top of the tower. Endeavor was on top of the tower, laughing hysterically as he flipped his bag over and threw dozens of pumpkin bombs onto the tower, running from one to the other and removing the tops. Grabbing one of the pumpkin bombs, Curry was about to toss it over the edge when she had another thought and pulled herself in the direction of the glider. Behind her, Deku struggled to stand and then stumbled, losing all sense of balance. He rubbed his eyes, shrugged, and made a valiant effort to regain his composure. Curry attached the pumpkin bomb to the turbine engine, and as soon as the first bombs exploded, Endeavor jumped on his glider and hit the acceleration. The turbine engine then exploded in a white flame, flinging Endeavor from it. Just as Dabi reached the top of the bridge's tower, Deku, still on his knees, seized Endeavor, who was stunned by the blast. "Destroy him! Assassinate him!" Dabi shouted. In compliance, Deku took Endeavor by one arm and one leg and threw him high into the air. "Enji, die, die, die." If you don't know, however, Deku doesn't kill any men, and most definitely not his best friend's father. As Endeavor flies through the air, Deku lifts both wrists and shoots a heavy black whip in the same direction. Endeavor, alive and kicking but imprisoned, screamed in frustration as he struck the bridge's vertical high-tension cables and was webbed into place, a fly caught in the middle of a perfectly symmetrical spider web. Dabi was furious from the top of the bridge tower. No, the remaining pumpkin bombs detonated, knocking Dabi to his knees, shaking Deku, and knocking Curry off the tower. Deku leapt to the tower's edge, dangling himself, and fired Black Whip at Curry, ultimately dying. Curry moaned as the web grabbed her ankle and prevented her from falling, but atop the bridge tower, Deku was slipping, pulled toward the edge by her weight, and had nothing to cling to. Just before he fell, he looked up, but there was nothing there, just those helicopters overhead. Now that he was almost over the edge, he rolled onto his back, slipped over the edge, and fell in midair. Curry screamed as she plunged toward the water. Deku fired out Black Whip, and as the water rocketed up toward them, the web struck the helicopter's undercarriage. "Pull up! Pull up! Pull up!" The pilot yelled as the extra weight in the helicopter pulled him downward. The pilot pulled back on the stick. The helicopter pulled up, and away from the bridge, jerking Curry and Deku upwards as they dangled from the undercarriage due to the strength of his webbing. Deku pulled Curry up to his level with his remaining strength and held her with one arm wrapped around her and the other gripping the web. They flew over the water, which now glistened like diamonds because the last remnants of the fog had been destroyed by the morning sun. She reached up and lifted the bottom of Deku's mask, exposing only his lips, and Curry gazed into his eyes. "Kiss me now." Their mouths fell together and devoured each other, so there's no need to tell him twice. As police officers ascended the high-tension cables and approached Endeavor to arrest him, Dabi stood by himself on the bridge tower. "He's still alive. You left him alive, you idiot." "Deku, Deku," cried Dabi. When Shoto Todoroki was unable to have the woman he loved, he stumbled to the bridge's railing and looked out over the river to see Deku hanging from the helicopter as it flew off, kissing Curry passionately. Shoto Todoroki screamed, "Deku!" Rage was born. Permanent, murderous rage. He blamed the hero for his family's devastation and his love's loss. Deku and Curry turned and withdrew their kiss. Deku whispered, "Please don't protect me anymore," and stroked her face. Miko. She was so deeply in love that when she opened her eyes, he had vanished, swinging away into the canyon of skyscrapers. Quote. Izuku, even though he is aware of her identity, he was unaware that she was aware of his secret and that she would always defend Izuku Midoriya. It was a somber day as Shoto Todoroki, wearing a suit, walked slowly down the front steps of the courthouse downtown, accompanied by attorneys. He nodded, and the attorneys gave him encouraging pats on the back. A few hopeful words, like parole, 30 years, visitation, and so forth, were used, but they were greatly outweighed by the phrase, life in prison. Izuku, who was also wearing a suit, drew near and inhaled deeply. This was a difficult moment. Izuku's hands were cut to ribbons by the speeding elevator cable, but fortunately it was still winter and he could wear gloves to cover them. Shoto saw him and extended a hand for a shake. Shoto shook Izuku's hand and said, "Thanks for everything, Izuku." Izuku wanted to scream, but he was able to just wince. "Hardly, I suppose you're not to blame." His arms tightened around him as Izuku threw them around him. "I don't have a father anymore," Shoto replied, "and I never had a brother." Extremely guilty, Izuku hung his head and said, "I'm so sorry." "Me too," Shoto said in a whisper. Izuku forced a remorseful smile and said, "Yeah, aren't we kind of orphans? What's left?" "Not much." Shoto withdrew and met Izuku's gaze. "Accept each other. You have always been my brother," he said, embracing Izuku once more. Izuku closed his eyes. "You want irony? We got irony here." A moment later, some family members pulled Shoto away and pulled him into another embrace. Izuku turned and saw Kuri. She looked at him, but neither of them knew what to say, so she embraced him. When he turned to face her, all he saw was Miko, repeatedly trying to save him with his hands out, but he was crushed by a boot because of him. Kuri observed him, knew what he was thinking, but was unable to speak because it was his secret. As two, once more, friends. Izuku was split in two, his eyes brimming with emotion over her shoulder. Izuku told himself, tell her, she deserves to know, she already protects Deku. Izuku looked directly into her eyes before turning away with a hero's creed burning in his mind. How simple it would be to simply open my mouth and tell her, Izuku Midoriya, the skinny kid next door who has always loved her and always will love me. Rather, he departed, soaring through the heavens and speeding past the structures in enormous, elegant arcs. I can't, though, and I will always remember the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. The buildings were racing past, but not us, and it was dizzying and thrilling as one gloved hand shot out black whip and swung off in a different direction. Because I love her, she will never, ever know. She needs to stop being Miko because I will never, ever allow her to be harmed again. This is my gift, he said, looking up at his reflection in a massive mirrored building. He was getting closer to the building quickly, and now he could see his reflection, which was getting bigger and bigger. My curse is this. Finally, he saw us as a figure, complete with a green costume, a mask, a metal shield, and a hood that resembled his hero, All Might. He splat against the side of the mirrored building. I am the magnificent Deku.
So this was it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.